Pokemon Sword and Shield have been the most divisive games that the series has ever churned out. The community is divided, with much of the fandom boycotting and disowning Generation 8 for a range of reasons, none more so than Dexit, the removal of over half the existing Pokemon from the game. On the other hand, you have people who defend the series against all criticism and refuse to admit any faults. To be clear, my stance on Sword and Shield doesn't fall into either of these extremes, and I intend to show why that is over the course of this long-winded commentary on the games. My standpoint would be this: Pokemon Sword and Shield are my least favorite games to release first in their generation, but they're still great fun, and I would recommend them to any fan of the series. What I mean by that is that out of Red and Blue, Gold and Silver, Ruby and Sapphire, Diamond and Pearl, Black and White, X and Y, Sun and Moon, and Sword and Shield, the newest pair is my personally least enjoyed set of games, and I've played them all. With that being said though, the games aren't all terrible, and I still found a great deal of enjoyment out of playing through both of them. This middle ground approach is the perspective that this commentary comes from and is the foundation of this video. Typically, people hate a fence sitter and the internet demands you go one side or the other, but to do that wouldn't be true to my experience, so whatever. The goal of this video then is to justify this standpoint by highlighting both the positives and negatives of my Galar journey, seeing how they both push the series forward and pull it back a few steps, and allowing others to agree or disagree freely in the comments below. Before jumping into the critique fully, let me get some logistical stuff out of the way. I'm not sure how long this video will end up being, but I'd bet the coin right off of a Meowth's head that it will be on the lengthy side. Therefore, I've decided to include timestamps in the description below if you want to jump to certain portions of the video. That being said though, there's a lot of topics I intend to touch on throughout this video, so I recommend watching it all. In order to make this video, I first played Pokemon Shield in its entirety in handheld mode, and am now playing Sword to supply footage for this video. My first playthrough was almost completely a blind one, as I avoided every trailer and piece of information that released after the E3 demo of 2019. I had no idea what to expect and only knew about the starters, a few of the new Pokemon, that Galarian forms would exist, about the wild area, and of course, Dexit. My second playthrough was completely planned out from the start in great detail, all in an effort to plan this video, even to go so far as to play Sword for this video so that the title could be as clever as I think that it actually is. Finally, let me state that this video assumes you've played Pokemon before and are familiar with the series. I'm going to be discussing a lot of topics in this video, but I won't be spending time telling you how to catch a Pokemon or that fire is super effective against grass. I may discuss things relating to these simple ideas and the execution of them, but I hope not to baby you along. Oh, and I wrote this whole script about the base game before the announcement of DLC, so I won't be mentioning anything about that until maybe the end. Okay, I believe that's all the logistical and background stuff out of the way, so let's begin. After selecting your character's biological sex and race, as well as setting a name for your character, the game brings you into its world in standard Pokemon fashion. A man stands in a stadium with thousands of cheering fans applauding his every word. This man is Chairman Rose, and he serves as this game's introduction to the world of Pokemon. It's pretty standard for Pokemon games to start with a monologue like this, one of the many traditions that have been a part of every Pokemon game. Some feel intrinsic to the series, while others are starting to feel stale. Touching on tradition is something I intend to cover throughout this video, but for now, suffice it to say that after 8 generations, Rose's comments on Pokemon being mysterious seems a little tone-deaf. Soon though, we're introduced to the Galar Region's champion, Leon, who shows off the new primary mechanic available in Sword and Shield, Dynamaxing, and it looks pretty sweet. The camera pulls back and we get our first glimpse of our playable character, as it's revealed he's been watching a live stream of Leon's battle on his phone. How contemporary. Soon, our neighbor Hop bursts in and informs the player that Leon is his older brother, and he implores you to come meet the champion at his house, which I guess means that the battle wasn't a live stream at all, come to think of it. After grabbing our bag, we head out and get our first extended look at one part of the Galar region, and it does look quite nice. The framing and draw distance allows us to see further than any other Pokemon games have permitted before this, and it looks good to these eyes. After a quick interlude with the technology is amazing guy, we arrive at Hop's house, where we learn that Leon hasn't arrived yet. We get 2 bits of information about Hop and Leon here. One, that Hop is very much a doer, not a thinker. He goes in hot and rarely takes time to stop and think. He's not a patient kid. Also, we learn that Leon is apparently terrible with directions. Such a specific detail makes the player think it will factor in later in the game, but it never really does. It's just his one big flaw. Besides that, he's pretty much perfect in every single way. Almost everyone in the Pokemon universe, outside of people in the evil teams, is an over-the-top good person, and Leon is no different, and it leaves a lot to be desired in terms of character development. It turns out it's kinda hard to make perfect people even more perfect. As we reach Leon at the train station, we get a brief cutscene, and if you notice a few drops in frame rate here, get used to it because it happens quite a bit in the game. It never lasts more than a few seconds, but it will be noticeable. This cutscene is quite good though. It shows how revered Leon is and how much Hop looks up to him, just by the expression on his face. But moving along, we get back to Hop's house for the most important decision in any Pokemon game: choosing a starter. This cutscene introducing Grookey, Sobble, and Scorbunny is fantastic. There's no other way to put it. For the first time, we get some true insight into the personality of each starter. Scorbunny is happy-go-lucky and full of energy, Sobble is easily startled and prefers to hide, and Grookey is inquisitive and uses his stick to investigate. Each of them is unique, and for the first time, the games do what the anime always has: personified each Pokemon. This allows for the player's choice to be more than just mechanical and visual, but also based on potentially a real bond through shared personalities. It's brilliant. In my original playthrough, I went with my favorite based on looks, Sobble, but all of them are pretty good here. I wish I could say the same for their final forms, but I guess more on that later. Spoilers, I don't think they're good. Here though, I've decided to pick Grookey, and I've given him the nickname of Ringo. Allowing players to nickname their Pokemon is one of the best decisions the series has ever made, as it's one additional way of making your individual Pokemon feel meaningful to you. I've named this Grookey Ringo as an homage to the legendary Beatles drummer Ringo Starr. Grookey's final form is essentially a gorilla drummer, and given that Galar is based off of the United Kingdom, birthplace of the Beatles, it feels like a good fit. Given that a few new Pokemon in Generation 8 have some sort of musical ability, it hardly seems like a coincidence. I'm sure the Beatles were an inspiration in their designs. It's not the only obvious connection to Great Britain. Galar as a continent is more lengthy than it is wide, just like Great Britain, and features a lot of direct correlations to the Earth location it's based on, like a love of soccer. Basing regions off of places outside of Japan started in Generation 5, but I applaud the fact that they've continued to do this in subsequent games. The next morning, it's time for our first Pokemon battle, as we take on our rival/friend, Hop. For the first time, your rival's Startermon isn't their first Pokemon, as Hop already owned a Wooloo. This is just a slight small tweak, yet it feels so refreshing. It's little things like this that Sword and Shield needed more of. It has quite a bit, but it really needed to do more. Another example of this would be how using a super effective move actually garners a reaction out of Hop. He's genuinely surprised at the ability you display. It's a great first battle and starts your journey off on the right foot. As the battle concludes, the gym challenged is teased before a Wooloo we saw earlier on crashes through a fence and heads into the restricted lands of the Slumbering Weald. Entering the Weald brings the player to one of the most atmospheric areas of the game, a forest covered in a dense fog that not even a Staraptor's defog could clear. The Weald is said to be home to the legendary Pokemon of the Galar region, but your first encounter won't bring you face to face with it. In both versions, the game script demands that you have 3 wild encounters, 2 with Skwovet, the Rattata of the region, and 1 with Rookidee, the Pidgey of the region. Writing this script, I noticed that I impulsively wrote the Rattata of the region, as it's a terminology Pokemon fans have come to use. Skwovet's design is okay, and I do like Rookidee a lot, but what's disappointing to me is that even after 8 generations, they don't switch up the mandatory requirement of having a Rattata and Pidgey equivalent for each region. According to Bulbapedia, there are only 81 new Pokemon introduced in Galar. 2 of them are the Rattata clone and its evolution, 3 are the Pidgey clone and its evolution, and of course there's the Pikachu of the generation, Morpeko. That's 6 out of the 81 new Pokemon, not a huge chunk, but I can't help but wish they had changed it up. Corviknight is sick, but come up with something new. Not every first route in every game needs to have a normal rodent and a normal flying bird. Venturing further into the fog brings us to a meeting with one of Galar's legendary Pokemon, Zacian in Sword version, or Zamazenta in Shield. It apparently has used Double Team to its maximum effect though, because you can't hit it with any kind of attacks, and eventually it makes you pass out due to fog, however that works. Leon eventually saves us and adds to the mystery surrounding this Pokemon by saying that maybe the stories about the Slumbering Weald are true. Not much more to say about this section though, it's a story bit through and through, so let's move on to Route 1. Route 1 is probably the poorest design of them all, at least based on its physical layout. It's a straight shot from Postwick to Wedgehurst with a big loop diverging off of it. I get why they made it that way, so that the story can let you go to Wedgehurst before getting a Pokemon, but still, it feels lazy. Route 1 is home to more Rookidee and Skwovet, along with new Pokemon like Wooloo, Nickit, and Blipbug. Obviously, the looks of Pokemon is completely subjective, but that won't stop me from offering my commentary on some of them. Wooloo and Nickit feel like valuable additions to the roster of Pokemon. The sheep in particular looks great. Its simple and cute design will appeal to many, and it's no wonder people consider it the mascot of Generation 8 already. The first thing players will notice here is that Pokemon roam the overworld just like they did in Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee, which is a welcome touch. Mechanically, this is brilliant. Random encounters in older generations were so frustrating when you just wanted to find a specific Pokemon or wanted to avoid them altogether. Of course, you can't just eliminate wild encounters altogether for obvious reasons. Having Pokemon show up in the tall grass means that you can see what you're going to encounter before you engage with them, so if you're looking for something specific, it's much easier to find. However, most of these grass patches are relatively confined, and as we'll see later, some Pokemon chase after you once you're spotted, meaning you can't always avoid wild battles completely. As a quick side note, Pokemon in the overworld either chase you, or are neutral towards you, or run away from you, which is a great way of giving a little bit of natural insight into their personalities. It's another small detail that's appreciated in making this place feel real. Anyway, on top of the new approach, in order to not alienate fans who prefer the old way, there are still truly random encounters. Exclamation points in the grass mean an encounter will occur, you just don't know with what. In fact, some Pokemon are locked behind these encounter types, meaning you'll have to keep searching if you want one exclusive to it. This approach allows for the best of both worlds. It's easier to encounter the Pokemon you specifically desire, it's easier to avoid wild battles, and you still have a way to have truly random encounters. Everyone wins. This isn't the first time we've been in Wedgehurst, but it's the first time this small country town becomes explorable. Our first stop is at the Pokemon Lab, where we meet Sonia, Leon's former rival and Professor Magnolia's assistant. Sonia will play a major role in the game's story, and so it's kind of edgy when describing Sonia, Leon simply refers to her as someone who can cook well. Oof, poor girl. But she does give us our Pokedex and asks us to go meet her and the professor at her home at the end of Route 2. Before we get there though, a quick stop at the Pokemon Center seems like a good idea to our rival Hop, and popping in reveals a new look for these free healthcare centers. In Pokemon Sword and Shield, Pokemon Centers not only contain the healing station and the Pokemart, where you can also sell items now, but also a new face this time around, the Name Raider and Move Tutor, all conveniently wrapped up into one man who appears across every single Poke Center in Galar. If you want to change the name of a Pokemon you caught, you can do so here. But beware, if you've traded with your friends, you won't be able to nickname those Pokemon because they weren't originally captured by you. This will irk many players and won't bother others, so it is what it is. If you want your Pokemon to forget a move or relearn one it already knew, you can do that here as well. In previous titles, this all-in-one approach didn't exist, and you'd have to travel to one-off NPCs in random towns to do these functions. It's streamlined in Sword and Shield for the better. Before heading out, it's wise to let Nurse Joy heal up all your Pokemon, and seeing the animation is always one of the little details I look forward to seeing in all of the new games. I love seeing all my creatures displayed on screen as their HP and PP gets restored. It's way better than the NPCs in the overworld who can just randomly heal up your entire team with one fade into a black screen. From a mechanical level, I get why NPCs are capable of doing Nurse Joy's job without the same technology, but it does really break up the narrative a bit. And finally, stocking up on some antidotes and paralysis heals is always a good idea at the first Pokemart. You're gonna need them at some point, so you might as well grab some. And that's what I did. Wedgehurst is also home to the game's first fashion store, where players can customize their avatar's outfit. This feature was first introduced in Generation 6, X and Y, and has remained mostly unchanged since then. You can buy shirts, pants, shoes, socks, backpacks, hats, and other accessories like glasses for your character to wear. When this was first introduced, it was an easy win for Game Freak, as it's something that every fan will either love or not pay attention to at all. In other words, there isn't much blowback in delivering on a feature that the community has wanted for a long time. I'm glad to see it has returned here, and thanks to our mother giving us a bunch of cash for our journey, it's easy to customize our character to our liking right here this early in the game. Other shops later in the game will feature different styles and options, so there's plenty of ways to dress your Pokemon trainer how you see fit, and then to show them off later in Wi-Fi battles with friends. With that though, we're ready to head over to Route 2 to meet up with Professor Magnolia. The design of Route 2 is essentially a stretched out version of Route 1. It's longer, but it's at least not a straight path visually. There's a few nooks as well that hide a few items. The first thing I want to mention in this section is how Pokemon Sword and Shield have eased up on how tutorials are handled. Typically in Pokemon games, you get told how to do everything, with the most infamous being how to catch a Pokemon, useful for first-time players, not so useful for 20-something-year-olds who have been playing their whole life. Sword and Shield has 3 main tutorials. One is an explanation of the Pokedex, one is for how to use a Pokemon Center, and the last is for how to catch a Pokemon. Luckily, in these games, we've been given the option to skip these pace killers. The first two can be skipped simply by telling the NPC you're speaking with that this isn't your first rodeo, and the third is handled for you behind the scenes. If by the time you reach Route 2 and you've already caught another Pokemon, Leon won't tell you how to do so, because clearly you've already got it down. This handling of tutorials is very player friendly, but of course, it doesn't stop the game from dragging along with NPCs constantly telling you where to go next and walking hand in hand with you if you want. Ugh, I hate that. Route 2 is home to two Pokemon who I will be adding to my team for this official playthrough, and sorry internet, Yamper isn't one of them. Go ahead and dislike the video now if you want. I don't like Yamper's design. I know many do, but it just looks like a walking hot dog to me. Its evolution Boltund is much more appealing in my eyes, but Yamper is just too plain for me to use. Another new mon here is the turtle Pokemon Choodle, which is another case where I like the evolution Dreadnought a lot more. Choodle isn't the first time we've seen a turtle Pokemon. How it's not even the second time. Or the third. Or the fourth. And if you count this ugly thing, the fifth. Oh, or the sixth. This is the 7th time that Game Freak has given us a turtle Pokemon, and it's mons like this that have me questioning for the first time on a personal level if Pokemon has run out of ideas for new creatures. The worst part is, turtles are even my favorite animals, and I'm getting sick of them. Try some more obscure animals to base Pokemon off already. It's getting old. Some of these designs, it's just too much. My next actual teammate though is Zigzagoon, a Pokemon who has been given a Galarian form. The credit for regional variants of Mons can't be given to Generation 8 because it was already established in Alola in Generation 7. However, it's a good addition from Game Freak and I'm glad they've continued it. This game even takes it a step further as some of the regional variants evolve into brand new Pokemon. It plays on our nostalgia to see old Mons remade with new types, but it's also equally as exciting to see them evolve further or differently than what we've come to know. It uses our expectations against us to surprise us. In all, 13 Pokemon got regional variants: Zigzagoon, Lanoon, Stunfisk, Yamask, Ponyta, Rapidash, Farfetch'd, Meowth, Weezing, Mr. Mime, Corsola, Darumaka, and Darmanitan. Of these, 6 got brand new evolutions. Meowth evolves into Berserker, Lanoon evolves into Obstagoon, Farfetch'd evolves into Surfetch'd, Mr. Mime evolves into Mr. Rhyme, Corsola evolves into Cursula, and Yamask evolves into Runerigus. Some of the names for these new Mons are downright lazy though, but I can't deny the shock factor that they have and how they are sweet to uncover for yourself if you haven't been spoiled on them. Corsola evolving into Cursula is probably my favorite, but it's exclusive to Shield and a pain to find, which we'll get to that later on. For this playthrough though, I'm using a Galarian Zigzagoon, which I've nicknamed Zigzag. Original, I know. Making our way to Magnolia's house advances the story, as both our character and Hop are seeking approval from Leon to take on the gym challenge. Magnolia and Leon allude to Dynamaxing, this game's big new feature, and Hop's brother tells us the only way he will endorse us is to impress him with a battle. So we take on our rival Hop and thoroughly crush him in a complete sweep of his team. Pokemon has always had a disconnect between how battles play out and how NPCs react to them. Leon says he always takes something away from every battle he watches, and that this one was so good that he has no choice but to endorse us both. Yet it was so one-sided that it's hard to justify endorsing Hop. I get why the game has to do this, but it always causes some dissonance. Our hero's dreams are recognized though when a pair of wishing stars falls from the sky, and Magnolia uses them to craft Dynamax bands for you and Hop so that you may utilize Dynamaxing. Yeah, it's clear that Hop has big visions for his future. He wants to go on the journey of a lifetime, and he wants to be a champion by defeating his brother. His personality reminds me of Hal's from Sun and Moon, just more goal-oriented. The copy and pasted animations probably doesn't help in that. Before moving on, we have a few things to wrap up in Route 2. The first is collecting this item hidden behind the professor's house. The camera angle changes so drastically here, and I can't remember it doing that at any other point in the game. I kind of like it though, I don't know, not everything in this video is going to be deep, you know. I just like this one random camera angle change, it's kind of sweet. I also meant to collect my next team member before fighting Hop, but honestly, I forgot. So heading to this easily missed patch of water allows me to do so now. The days of multiple fishing rods and annoying fishing mechanics is over for the Pokemon series, as Sword and Shield elect to give you a rod from the very beginning. Anytime the water ripples, you can catch a Pokemon there, and every time something is going to spawn. The time between bites may vary, but something will always come up. In this case, it's Arrokuda, which will be my water-type mon for this journey. I've decided to nickname it Torpedo, given that it's a Pokemon that hits hard and with speed. With that though, it's time to head back to Wedgehurst and to catch a train to Motostoke. As we get ready to depart for Motostoke, Hop gives us a TM, which function the same as they always have, but with a small twist which we'll talk about much later on. Our mom also gives us some camping gear, but again, we'll discuss that later. On our way to the next city, our train is forced to make a stop at the Wild area because a few Wooloo have taken up position on the tracks and refuse to move. I love the little detail of how you can see the Wooloo raising hell on the train platform by rolling all around. It's these little missable details that help give the game more life. Players can also get a Pikachu or an Eevee here from a trainer if the game detects a save file for Let's Go Pikachu or Let's Go Eevee on the system. But finally, we arrive in the Wild area, the game's biggest addition to the series from an exploration standpoint. But first, we get a sick burn from Magnolia to Sonia that I absolutely refuse to gloss over. I think it's pretty reasonable to say that Generation 8's three largest contributions or ideas to add to the series would be the Wild area, Dynamaxing, and max raid battles, and so I want to spend a lot of time looking at these three components. We will end up visiting the Wild area again later in this playthrough, and so for pacing reasons, I want to divide up my discussion on it into two parts. The first will be about breaking it down and highlighting all the positives that this large open area brings to the title, while later we'll look at the negatives. So, the Wild area. It's a massively large landscape plopped right in the middle of the Galar Region, where Pokemon can roam around freely, a la a nature reserve where animals are protected, except here you can catch them and force them to beat each other up. And yes, you can freely rotate the camera, because apparently that's a huge feature that people want. I don't really get it, but it's here finally. There are also many different areas that make up this chunk of Poke Earth, but a grassy terrain engulfs almost all of it outside of a few distinct regions. The weather also changes as you move between the different subsections. You're free to battle any Pokemon you come across, but you won't be able to catch higher level ones until you collect a certain number of gym badges, 5 additional levels for every gym badge. The Pokemon in the Wild area are plentiful, and every generation of Pokemon has a few members roaming around here. The combination of having Pokemon move around on their own, while also making the area so open, leads to a lot of life being breathed into this area, as new Pokemon are always popping up. Even if said popping in does look kind of strange, I'd say. Seeing a Butterfree, though, flying overhead, or a Gyarados swimming in a lake, is genuinely charming to fans of the series. It feels like you're at the zoo and are free to walk amongst the animals without any of the safety concerns. The Wild area begs the question that has been on the mind of many Pokemon fans for years. will the series ever go open world, or at least become less linear? Alola and the 7th generation felt like the most unique take we've ever gotten on the Pokemon formula due to the nature and setup of the Island Challenge instead of going through the traditional gym system. Still, it wasn't much in terms of being a complete overhaul of the game's setup. Generation 8 is once again very linear, but this wild area seems like an experiment to test out large open areas, and it leaves the door open for exploring Pokemon in a new way in future games. If Game Freak ever decides to make an open world Pokemon game, and quite honestly, I doubt they do, this seems like a good first step at dipping their toes in the water to get some sort of idea for how much work is needed to be put in from a technical perspective. Clearly, they are capable of getting a vast open terrascape to function, and it feels better to find it here as a feature in a traditional Pokemon game than it would be to find it in its same form in some sort of new open world Pokemon generation. And I say that because the technology and what they've implemented here is not quite good enough to stand on its own. The greatest strength of the wild area is the amount of variety that can be added quickly to your team. In a game where type diversity is the key to winning battles, that's huge. I can't remember any game in the series before where an ice type could be caught so early, but here's a horde of Bergmites chilling around waiting to be captured. Oh, by the way, is Avalugg a turtle Pokemon? If so, I guess that makes Choodle the 8th turtle. Damn it. But besides that, you can stumble into Vulpix, Bunnelby, Tyrogues, Timpoles, Metapods, Ralts, Electrike, Wingulls, and much, much more. Giving us more Pokemon to choose from this early on is fantastic. Variety and choice is usually not a bad thing, and that certainly holds true here. You can only carry 6 Pokemon with you into battle at a time, and so I'm all for making the player think about what they really want to use by giving them more options. It makes the Pokemon you do choose to use all the more special. It's way better than always rolling into the first gym with your starter, the Rattata and Pidgey of the generation, and some other random single-type Mon. On top of that, returning the next day will bring new weather, and with that change comes new Pokemon into each subsection, which incentivizes returning here every day to expand your team or your Pokedex. Being able to battle Pokemon that outlevel you drastically is also a design consideration that I can appreciate. It makes sense that you can't catch Pokemon way above your intended level because that would trivialize the battle system. However, being able to fight them and defeat them is satisfying because of the challenge it presents. All your Pokemon are much weaker than this opponent, yet you can overcome the odds, David and Goliath style. Challenge is something that fans of the series have been wanting more of for a long, long time, and at least this is a small dose of that. The wild area also contains its own unique currency called Watts, that is earned both by interacting with dormant Pokemon dens, as well as defeating Pokemon in max raid battles. There are tons of vendors in the wild area, although you may not notice them too easily since they pop in and out of existence, but there's a bunch of things to purchase from them for Watts. Some will sell a one-use version of Move TMs called TRs. They function the same way as a TM, but break after a single use, much like TMs used to in earlier generations. By the way, I said we were going to talk about TMs much later, but here we are in the same section, so deal with it. On the flip side of that, though, I am sticking to my word about talking about camping way later, but you can buy things like curry ingredients from these vendors as well. Some of the NPC merchants will also give you a random item in exchange for a certain number of Watts, like this one who gave me some big pearls. There's also a duo in the upper section of the wild area who sometimes give you components used to make one of the 4 fossil Pokemon introduced in this generation. Watts then becomes a valuable currency to have, and all the rewards provides players with more motivation to engage with raid battles in the wild area. To wrap this section up, as I just alluded to, yes, you can do max raid battles here and fight Dynamax Pokemon, but that's something I want to save for later in the video. But for now, the wild area is pretty good, but it does have some negatives, and we'll get to that. Arriving in Motostoke for the first time is pretty spectacular, and reminded me heavily of seeing Castelia City in black and white for the first time. The quick panning shots that show glimpses of different locations within the city also provides a snapshot of what we're in store for here, and I love that they do this for all the cities in the game. The first visit to Motostoke is the game's chance to establish the structure for how gyms will work. Let me be clear, this is easily the best approach Pokemon has ever taken in regards to establishing a narrative behind the 8 gyms and your reason for partaking in it. In Galar, each year, the gym challenge is held to determine who is the greatest trainer in all the region, and since he was 10 years old, Hop's brother Leon was always the one who came out on top. The top trainer for each of the 18 types, like Fire, Dark, and Bug, battle it out to see which 8 of them will get to be a part of this year's gym challenge. 7 of those 8 gym leaders earn a spot at the end of the gym challenge in a big tournament. The last spot goes to the best trainer in Galar, who must complete the gym challenge by defeating the 8 selected leaders after being endorsed by another strong trainer. In our case, we are able to enter the gym challenge after being endorsed by Leon. In prior titles, there was never a reason for your character to go on the gym challenge, and it was never explained why you had to visit the gyms in the order that you did. You just did because that's how the game was set up. Here though, Game Freak has used the linear structure of the series as a way to springboard into a unique narrative that gives us a better understanding of why gyms are structured the way they are. In Galar, you must face the gyms in a set order, as each of them gets more challenging than the last, which aligns perfectly with Pokemon's core concept of leveling up slowly but steadily. As we will see, the first gym leader Milo ended up being the last candidate who qualified to be a gym leader this year, and therefore he is the first one that players have to go against. It's this kind of world building that further builds into the fact that Galar feels like the most well-realized region we've seen so far. Registering for the gym challenge and preparing for the ceremony also gives us a chance to meet our other 2 rivals for the game, Bede and Marnie. First though, we have to sign up for the challenge and pick an official number for our uniform. I went with 69. Yep, not original at all, but I guarantee you'll be seeing a lot of jerseys with 69 and 420 in competitive play. The narrative around our rivals can be pretty hit or miss, but Bede's character development ends up being the most notable, as we'll see. He starts out as an arrogant, unlikable egomaniac, and while he holds onto many of these traits, he does grow and change as the story progresses, as we'll see. He reminds me a lot of Chaz Princeton's character if you've ever watched Yu-Gi-Oh! GX. Marnie is a little bit weaker though, as she doesn't really change all that much, but does stand up for herself and pursues her goals admirably. Hop is obviously our other rival, and I'll talk more about all 3 as the story progresses. Arriving at the Budew Inn also gives us our first exposure to the lore surrounding the Galar region, and unfortunately, this is not some of Game Freak's best work. It reminds me of the stories in X and Y and Diamond and Pearl because it's pretty one-dimensional and bog standard. Even after demanding Sonia tell us all the details about Galar's history, she only informs us about the Darkest Day, a single day where a gigantic Pokemon came to wreck Galar and the region was only saved when a hero, donning a sword and shield, took down the creature. That's it. Sonia believes that your earlier encounter with a strong Pokemon in the Slumbering Weald may somehow be connected to this legend, but she needs to do more research to know for sure. As we will come to see, it's a very surface level story with not much explanation. The cutscene introducing the gym challenge though is grand, although it's still so strange that there's no voice acting with it. it creates a disconnect that seems unnecessary. I'm not saying I want every line to be fully voice acted, but it would be nice for these big moment cutscenes to have some voice power behind them. Seeing the gym leaders builds a sense of anticipation for what's to come, along with a sense of scale. This really is going to be a challenging yet fun adventure. The fact that one of them is missing also builds up some intrigue, and since it's the penultimate leader, it's something players will have to keep wondering about, which allows for the mystery to grow. It's one of the best cutscenes in the game. It's almost time to head to Route 3, but first we must battle Hop again, who informs us that we need to head to Turffield. Before leaving though, I wanted to show off quickly this building where you can customize your trainer's uniform for official league matches. You can buy outfits corresponding to different Pokemon types here, and it's pretty cool for trainers who use a monotype team. Anyway, let's move on. Route 3 is home to two of my favorite new Pokemon, one of which will be a team member. The other is Roly-Coly, a Pokemon designed to be the antithesis of a normal rock type. It wants to be fast. A little rock wheel on its bottom side allows it to zip around, and the move Rock Polish doubles its speed in battle. Its second form, Carkol, is also well designed, and a natural extension to a rock Pokemon that wants to move fast. Unfortunately, it can't complete the trifecta as its final form, Colossal. It's just a big piece of coal that looks really plain. That being said though, Roly-Coly is my favorite Pokemon from this generation. I love it, 10 out of 10. Our new team member though is a fire and bug type named Sizzlipede, who can actually be very difficult to find. He only appears 1% of the time and is exclusive to random encounters, which makes him a pain in the ass to find. In my original playthrough of Shield, I spent about 2 hours looking for one with no success, until I realized there was a very obscure way to attract him without much effort. If you have a Pokemon with Flash Fire, you can attract the Fire Bug right to you. Earlier in the wild area, I caught a Vulpix with this ability. In battle, it makes your Pokemon immune to Fire-type moves, and raises the damage of your Fire-type attacks. But nowhere does it tell you that it will make Sizzlipede appear far more often in random encounters. But it does. After adding Vulpix to the front of my party, I find one immediately. It puts up a good fight and annoys the hell out of me a few times, but eventually it's mine, and I nicknamed it Habanero. It's little unspoken things like this that Pokemon could really use more of. Things for the community to uncover on their own and share via the internet. I wish more lower encounter rate Pokemon in the game worked in a similar manner. I wanted to spend some time talking about animations within the battles as we fight our way to the end of the route. Pokemon battles automatically start when a trainer makes eye contact, and I love the red and blue background themes with your trainers that shows it's about to go down. Although I think it makes the frame rate drop a bit if my eyes don't deceive me. Within battles, I love the quick cut showing off the fight from a bunch of different angles. It adds a bit of spice to the flow of battle. And that spice is necessary, because the animations of Pokemon and moves outside of Dynamax max attacks look pretty dreadful. Pokemon barely move around in battle while waiting to attack. They just kinda shimmy a small amount. And when they do attack, they do one or maybe two animations that are supposed to correspond and look natural with every possible move within their move pool. Needless to say, they don't look that lively. Some of the actual attack animations have been redone, but they still don't look that great outside of having a bit more polish. Perhaps this would be more acceptable if Game Freak had not said that one reason for Dexit was so that they could spend more time enhancing the quality of animations, which really doesn't seem to be the case. Sure, some are better than before, but it's apparent that not enough time went into them to justify deleting over half of the existing Pokemon. This Smackdown attack looks awkward as hell with Sizzlipede just falling down. This Pancham's arm thrust is also nothing spectacular to look at. and moves like Aqua Jet and Flame Wheel start out cool, but then end with the Pokemon magically teleporting back to its original starting position. I'd like to see a little bit more effort in these animations. However, to play devil's advocate, I wouldn't want them to be overly long. I'd like to see the Pokemon move around more, but not if it comes at the cost of battles moving at a snail's pace, which very well could happen with complex animations. There's some middle ground in there though that I wish they would have explored. For example, I would have loved to see the Pokemon moving around the terrain or flying in the sky as they wait for trainers to pick a move or throw a Pokeball. Don't bog down the pace of battle with overly long animations, but give some life to battles by providing more movement in the moments where players are considering what to do next. It's hard not to be disappointed in these animations, considering that Pokemon is now not only on a home console, but the most powerful system it's ever appeared on, and Dexit is all the more difficult to accept because of this. On a cheerier note, at least my Grookey evolves into Thwackey before the end of the route, and to me, its design is light years better than the counterparts of Drizzile and Raboot, who both look more human than Pokemon. With that, we reach the first of two mines housed in Galar, and it's named just that, Galar Mine 1. What a terrible name for a Pokemon location. Game Freak, you couldn't come up with any original name for this mine location? Or did you just accidentally leave the placeholder name in the actual release? This may be the biggest nitpick of the entire video, but it's just so indolent to me. It's a terrible name. It's a shame too, because Galar Mine 1 is one of the biggest visual treats that the game offers, and I think that's in part due to it being enclosed, and that allows the atmosphere to come through more. The blue, red, and green gemstones shine all over the rock side while being drenched in light from the bright yellow mine lamps. Move too slow, and you'll miss out on seeing a carcole fly down the tracks, and it's a great moment if you can keep in stride with it. The amount of equipment and gear in this place also contributes to it feeling like an occupied space, and the workers are always looking to keep their Pokemon focused by training in battle with you. The Galar Mine is one of the most realized locations in the game. Stumbling further into the winding mine shaft, we find some trinkets on the floor, a TM, and a high value item to sell. Every time the player picks an item up off the ground that they haven't had before, the game gives a quick flash of information telling them what it is and what it does, which I find to be excellent. It's not invasive for returning players, but the payoff for new players is tremendous. They don't have to go fumbling around in the menus to see the function of the item. And it got me thinking about this game's approach to UI and menus, and I think it's probably the best the series has ever delivered. Popping open the menu screen reveals a few icons that are easily identifiable and labeled with the information most potent to it. Jumping into the Pokemon screen allows us to see our current party, their HP, and a summary of their moves, nature, and a history of how and where we met them. We can also choose to heal them right from this menu by utilizing the Restore button, which takes us to our bag, and more specifically, the healing section, to find exactly what we need. This allows me to heal up the team a bit before carrying on further. The bag is also easy to navigate with clearly labeled sections. You have your key items, your healing items, your TMs, really it's the whole 9 yards. Items that I haven't looked at yet also get a red beacon, which indicates that they're a new arrival to my inventory. It's sleek and it's functionable in the best way. The same goes for the Pokedex, which allows us to easily access data points on the Pokemon we've seen and captured. The Pokedex has always been easy to access and utilize, and the same goes here. This time around, they've added a way to view how many times you've encountered each Pokemon, which is a decent touch, and being able to view their models and animations is something that hardcore fans continue to appreciate. I know that I just mentioned this word a moment ago, but sleek really is the most fitting word to describe the UI and the menus in the game. They're simple, but it finds beauty in its dedication to that design principle. Soon, I stumble into a timber that is glowing yellow, and it's not the first time that I've seen a Pokemon like this. This gold aura denotes that the Pokemon is a quote-unquote brilliant variation of that Pokemon, which is a pretty candid word to use considering this region is based on Great Britain. Good job, Game Freak. Brilliant versions of Pokemon are unlocked only after encountering a Pokemon at least once before, with the more times you've encountered it, meaning the more likely a brilliant variation of that Pokemon will pop up. It makes the detail of seeing how many times you've battled a Pokemon in the Pokedex more relevant mechanically, and that also applies to the encounter rate for shiny Pokemon. Brilliant Pokemon have better IV stats than their less spectacular brethren. IV stats are set on Pokemon from its birth, and they can't be changed, so the higher they are, the better the Pokemon will be in battle, and with these brilliant Pokemon having better IVs, it makes them better overall. Brilliant Pokemon will also have a chance at having a move that can only be learned through breeding, which is called an egg move. Now, I won't be using this timber, but I decided to catch it anyway. This feature is more for the competitive battlers who seek out the best possible versions of Pokemon for the build that they desire. Before leaving the Galar Mine 1, we encounter Bede, and his smug attitude is shown off in full force when he claims that him being endorsed by the chairman, who is of a higher rank than the champion, makes him better than us. We of course spank him in battle, and as always, he retorts with some dialogue about how he let us win, and hurries off after stating he's collected all the wishing stars in this area, which will come into play later, so it's good that they set it up now. As with all the NPCs, we're in the early stages of Bede's development, so this part is about establishing his arrogance, and that is not lost on the player. And emerging from the mine brings us to Route 4. Route 4 is another scenic one, as the Turffield gym lies in the center of the background, beckoning in gym challengers, and it's a great landmark to show younger kids where they need to be going. Before we get there though, we have a route to clear out. I start by shaking down a berry tree. There's nothing really new about berries in this game. They provide the same benefits that they have in previous titles. Just like in Sun and Moon, you can collect berries by shaking down trees, but they've incorporated a risk and reward element to it now. Every time you shake the tree, berries will fall out. But if you shake it too much, a wild Squovit, or its evolution Greedent, will attack you. Whether you beat it or not doesn't matter, as some or all of the berries that fell out of the tree will be taken by other Pokemon while you battled. It means that your best choice is to shake each tree 2 or 3 times and quit. Nothing too special. We have a handful of trainers to take on in this route, and so I figured now would be a good time to highlight the leveling system that Pokemon Sword uses. More specifically, I wanted to look at the functionality of the EXP share in this title, as leveling itself is just like the previous generation at its core. The EXP share item has seen a consistent evolution across each new installment of the franchise, but for the first time in a long time, it seems like they finally got it right. The item itself is of course to be an aid to leveling. In earlier games, it was a held item that granted one Pokemon EXP from battle even if they didn't participate. In Generation 6 and 7, the EXP share became a key item that can be turned on and off by the player depending on their playstyle. In theory, this added a difficulty curve to Generation 6 and 7, as they had been constructed with the assumption that players would have the EXP share on. Turning it off meant more of a challenging experience. However, its execution left a lot to be desired and left many fans feeling that the series was far too easy. In Generation 8 though, the EXP share isn't even an item. It exists as an idea that if Pokemon are with you, they should gain experience from battles or by catching even if it's just by proxy. All Pokemon that participate in battle receive 100% of the experience allotted, while those who didn't battle receive anywhere from 45 to 55% of the experience total, with, I believe, the difference stemming from their level in relation to the level of the defeated Pokemon. In other words, a level 14 non-participant in battle against a level 16 Mon may gain 55% of the experience, while a level 18 non-participant may only gain 45% against that same Mon. In fact, I say 45 to 55% because they're nice round numbers, but it's more like 48 to 52%. It's not a huge difference. But I should mention that this applies for Pokemon that are relatively close in the level range to the one you're currently battling. I mean, for example, if you bring a level 1 Pokemon with you, it can get up to like 95% of the experience without ever seeing the field. Anyway, the point is, every Pokemon in your party will gain experience from every battle you participate in, whether they do or not. This allows the developers to plan trainer battles with some clarity, as they don't have to fumble between balancing trainers who do use the EXP share and those who don't. They know from the start that everyone is going to have it enabled, and because of this, they can create appropriate battles for the expected level range of where players will be on any given route. This clarity allows each trainer battle to be more tailor-made. However, the issue for many fans will be that it doesn't make the game necessarily harder or more challenging. You outnumber every trainer if you have a party of 6, and you'll still hardly ever lose a Pokemon battle so long as you utilize your type matchups properly. Overall, I like the decisiveness they took when implementing the EXP share this time around though. Players will still get the benefit of being able to level up lower level Mons without forcing them into battles that are way over their head. At the same time, they can craft the levels of wild Pokemon and trainers Pokemon to be right around where you, as a player, are expected to be. The side effect of this is that it's so much easier to level up Pokemon quickly, especially with the help of the EXP candies that we'll see later. But with that, we finally arrive at our first gym town, Turffield. It's been a bit of a slog to get to the first gym. In fact, my save file is at 4 hours now, and I can say with certainty that this is the longest it takes to reach the first gym out of any of the Pokemon games. From here though, it's gonna feel like a whirlwind tour through the 8 gyms as you visit them one after another with only single routes separating them. It creates a weird sense of pacing. You go from very slowly reaching your first gym to beating them all fairly quickly. And to be honest, I really don't enjoy this setup. I wish the games were more like the anime, where it takes a while to reach the next gym. Here though, it feels like a walk down to the next block is enough to reach your next big battle. I like that it took a while to reach the first gym, and I wish that slower, methodical pace had been maintained, but unfortunately for me, it wasn't. Before battling Milo though, Sonia calls us over to an ancient landmark of Galar and explains a bit more of the lore. An ancient geoglyph depicts a massive Pokemon which we deduce to be how our distant ancestors viewed Dynamaxing. Sonia ruminates quickly over what the connection is between the Darkest Day and Dynamaxing before scurrying off. This scene literally lasts for like a minute and a half and serves as just a quick exposition dump. All it does is ask a few questions that the story will answer later. And to be clear, the story in this game is one of Pokemon's weakest, probably the worst so far. And as we'll see, it's simple to the point of boredom throughout most of its duration, and then it gets to be nonsensical and rushed by the end. Now it's time for something a little bit more exciting, our first gym challenge and the introduction to how they function this time around. Here, each gym contains both a mission that players must first complete, and of course, the battle with the gym leader. I really like the idea of a gym mission as a qualifier. It's a task you must complete to show you are worthy enough to challenge the gym leader. Unfortunately, I think most of them end up flat, but luckily, Turffields is one of the best. As we push further on, most will feel lazy and uninspired, but this first one does not fit into that mold. Here, we are tasked with corralling some Wooloo and using their tackle ability to push further onward. The Wooloo flee as you chase them, and your goal is to get them aligned in a preset area so that they can smash through hay barrels so that you can progress. This mechanic is introduced and slowly built on over a series of 4 challenges. The first is simple, chase them forward. Then a Yamper is introduced who will scare the Wooloo away if he gets too close to them. Finally, the last 2 challenges add some extra obstacles and additional Yampers for the players to navigate. Is it revolutionary? No, but it took a basic and novel idea, one that feels natural to the Pokemon series, and built on it sufficiently, which is good enough for a gym mission. They even put a failsafe into it for younger kids, because battling gym trainers will remove the Yampers from the equation and make things all the more easy. This is my favorite gym mission in the game, and it's because it's clear that some effort went into it. Gym missions as a whole are a good idea. It adds a little something extra to do while working towards the leader and battling the trainers. Soon, it's time to face Milo, and he serves his purpose nicely as being an introduction to gym leader battles and Dynamaxing. I don't want to talk about Dynamaxing quite yet though, so bear with me. Instead, I want to praise the atmosphere building that Game Freak has conducted in these gym battles. In every other generation, battles with gym leaders felt like they occurred in a vacuum, unseeable or unknowable to anyone else. In Galar though, it's just the opposite. People love watching the gym challenge, picking their favorite trainer, and rooting them on. They flock as hundreds and thousands of people to stadiums to watch these events, and the entertainment they provide the people are made clear across Galar as people constantly comment on the latest developments of the gym challenge when you walk past them. Gym battles are a spectacle in Galar, and I love that. Milo only has 2 Pokemon, Gossifleur and Eldegoss, which I think is fine for a first gym leader. His second Pokemon is the one he Dynamaxes, and boy, does this add another level of spectacle to the battle. He promises the true show is about to start, and he makes good on his claim. The music, which is already adrenaline pumping, gets elevated further with the chant of the fans mimicking the sounds of vuvuzelas in a soccer pitch. For the first time in the series, gym battles are exciting from an entertainment standpoint, and it was easily one of the best decisions Game Freak made with this title. It's exciting. We're of course free to Dynamax as well, and making Habanero go Super Saiyan allows us to take down Eldegoss and collect our first gym badge. This gym challenge is a great introduction and sets a high standard that many of the other gym missions and some of the other gym leaders won't be able to live up to, as we'll see. But with that, we are encouraged to head east to Hulbury for another gym battle. Before reaching our next town though, we must make the trek through Route 5, and it's here where I want to look at 2 pretty big components of Pokemon, the new evolution methods introduced in Generation 8, as well as breeding. Zigzag evolves into a Lanoon during one of my battles on this route, and it got me thinking about the new evolution methods introduced in Sword and Shield. In total, 11 new forms of evolution are introduced. Some are just extensions of older methods, but some are completely new. 4 of these Pokemon, Darmanitan, Leafeon, Glaceon, and Chargebug, now evolve from different evolutionary stones, which is nothing exciting. 2 of the Pokemon, Sinistea and Applin, evolve from new items. Applin is catchable on Route 5 and has 2 potential evolutions depending on what type of apple you give it from a random NPC in Hammerlocke. Each of the 2 apples are exclusive to either Sword or Shield, meaning the form you get depends on the version that you bought. Sinistea evolves in a similar manner, but unlike with Applin, the thing it evolves into doesn't split into 2 separate Pokemon, it's really just a form difference. Neither of these 2 are too exciting though, they're just evolutionary stones that aren't evolutionary stones, they're just items. Kinda boring. Milcery, on the other hand, evolves from holding a specific item and spinning around. Its Alcremie form depends on which of the items you have it hold, what time of day it is, and in what direction your NPC spins. I kinda like this. Not every trainer is going to end up with the same Alcremie, and it's another one of those little things for the community to uncover on their own. Clubopus is a fighting Pokemon that only evolves when leveling up and knowing Taunt. It's not the first time we've seen this kind of evolution method, but it is cool to have another one. Toxel, meanwhile, its evolution form depends on its nature. Farfetch'd is also available starting on Route 5 and has a pretty rigid path to evolution. You have to get 3 critical hits with it in one battle, which can be made easier by having it hold a specific stick item. And finally, there's the craziest new evolution method, Yamask. In order to get Runerigus, Yamask has to receive 49 or more points of damage in battle, and then the player must walk under a very specific location in the wild area. I love the specificity of it. Overall though, I don't love the lasting implications of these new evolution methods. Game Freak continues to come up with new ways to evolve Pokemon, but that means those methods have to be ham-fisted into the next generation, or the Pokemon has to be cut out completely. That problem has already arrived in Sun and Moon with the removal of the Ice Rock and the Moss Rock locations to evolve Eevee into its Generation 4 forms. It creates yet another longevity problem for Pokemon to address down the road, but at least some of them feel fresh here. Route 5 is also home to one of Galar's daycare centers, the other being housed in the wild area. Breeding mechanics in Pokemon Sword and Shield remain pretty much the same as they always have been. If you want a baby Pokemon, you gotta leave 2 of the same species of the opposite gender, or a Pokemon with a Ditto, and soon they'll have an egg for you to hatch. I really don't want to go over breeding too much. There's plenty of guides on how to do it successfully to raise competitive Pokemon on YouTube. Instead, I want to comment on how obscure the mechanics behind breeding remains for new players. The lady in the daycare center gives you the briefest of outlines on how breeding works, but the more complex mechanics of it are never explained to the player. Now you might be saying, Nobnapnarp, haven't you said multiple times in this video that you enjoy the little obscure things that the community has to uncover for themselves? Well, yeah, I do, but breeding isn't some little component of the game. It's a critical component for people who want to battle competitively, and so refusing to explain it anywhere seems like a misstep. Items like the Destiny Knot and Everstone play a role in breeding. Abilities can affect how fast eggs hatch, egg moves can only be attained in certain ways, and a Pokemon's IV stats are critical as well. None of these things are ever explained to the player, yet they had a way to do so already implemented into the game, so I don't know why they didn't use it. There are a few times where things are explained in these brief slideshows, like Dynamaxing for example in the first gym. Sure, it may have taken a few slides, or an NPC who can repeat and break down the information, but I really would have liked to see Game Freak take initiative this time around and explain some of these things. Maybe they just assume everyone is going to play on Pokemon Showdown nowadays. I don't know, it just seems lazy to me to leave all of these major components unexplained to the player. The one thing I can appreciate about breeding though is that both of the daycare centers are put in the middle of wide open spaces where eggs can be hatched quickly. Route 5 gives you access to a bike that you can use to cover a lot of ground quickly, and the route is so horizontal that you can just hold left and then right and then left and then right to speed up the process of hatching eggs. According to some of the PokeTubers I watch, breeding has been streamlined a bit, but only for those who already know the most efficient ways. If you have no way to access YouTube, good luck figuring this stuff out for yourself. Route 5 wraps up with a battle against Hop, and after winning his first gym badge, it's clear that his confidence is through the roof, even after losing to us yet again. And just like that, we're in Hulbury. This peaceful seaside town is home to our second gym challenge, and honestly, not much more than that. It's here where we're introduced to Chairman Rose's assistant Olina, and it's clear she's the one who's keeping him focused. He mutters something about needing to stay on the people's good side to continue what they're doing. Very suspicious, huh? After spotting you, he asks you to meet him for dinner after collecting your second gym badge, and so it's time to go and do that. After locating Nessa by the town's lighthouse, she returns to the gym and awaits your challenge. Nessa's gym mission isn't a bad one, although it's the same simple puzzle concepts we've seen in Pokemon games before. You have to hit a number of switches in the correct order to unblock a path to the main stadium. The puzzle isn't very challenging at all, and to be fair, neither was the Wooloo one, but at least that felt original and unique to the region and to the Pokemon within it. There's also a few gym trainers sprinkled in to battle as well. Nessa's gym battle isn't that much more challenging than Milo's, and with the next one being a pretty big step up in difficulty, it's a shame this one wasn't more intermediate between the two. She has two first form Pokemon in Goldeen and Arrokuda, both of which are relatively weak. Ringo could easily plow through her entire team with ease, but I did decide to let Zigzag get in on the action too. Even though he doesn't have any super effective moves to use, his mid-tier strength attacks like Headbutt and Night Slash are more than enough to get the job done. Her ace, Dreadnought, is 4 times weak to grass moves, and so Ringo's Razor Leaf could have probably finished her off in one hit, even if she was Dynamaxed. Using super effective moves against trainers with low AI capabilities has always been the fastest way to mow through these games, and trust me, I plan to discuss that in later detail. For now, Nessa is defeated, and we claim our second gym badge, as well as a TM for Whirlpool? Seriously? Whirlpool is what you're giving us? Ugh, cheapskate. Not wanting you to forget about your date with Chairman Rose, Oleana stands waiting outside the gym for you to remind you that you have to go there next. At least she doesn't ask to teleport you there. The meeting with Rose is weird. He says he wants to talk to you specifically and to get to know you better. The problem with that, though, is, of course, our protagonist is a silent observer who never really speaks, and so the conversation can never actually be between just you two without it turning into a monologue. This is one Pokemon cliche I'd like to see Game Freak steer away from, or at least try something out different in a new game and see how fans react. Given that these games are written with children in mind though, maybe it's for the best. Our character could come off as kinda lame, but it would still be worth a shot in my eyes. Anyway, Rose talks about how Sonia should try looking for more information on Dynamaxing within the vaults of Hammerlocke, which is a town we will visit later. I shouldn't even have to say it, but yeah, spoilers, Rose is the bad guy of this game, and is even more forgettable than Lysander. We'll get to that later, but why is he helping Sonia uncover more information that could be detrimental to his plan? Like, I understand he's not a purely evil character, he just gets caught up trying to protect the people of Galar, but his means are unjustified. Yet, if your goal is to use shady methods and Dynamax energy to save Galar, why would you help someone uncover more information that may lead them to see what you're doing. It's nonsensical, but the game needs a way to get you to visit the vaults later, so voila. After this, he bolts. No dinner, no conversation with us. It's a colossal waste of our time after it was so important for us to be there. What the heck? Exiting the restaurant, Hop informs us that he's won another badge, and that our next destination should be at the Fire Gym in Motostoke. Pokemon has to maintain its linearity though, so backtracking won't do. The gym leader is held up in Galar Mine 2, and so that's where we head next. Galar Mine 2's name may be just as stupid as Galar Mine 1's, but it's also way uglier to boot. This cavern hardly feels touched by the miners, as there aren't many signs of conquering the cave system. We start out by encountering Bede again, who is just as smug as the previous times we beat him. You know he's a chump when he explains his loss to you by saying that he let you win. Still, Bede, alongside Hop, gets the best character development out of anyone, but more on that later. But one of the things that makes me laugh the hardest in this game is that when Bede's up against the ropes in battle, with his back to the wall, with just his Hatenna left, he claims he has some big move to turn the tide of battle. And it's Psybeam! Fucking Psybeam! Like, come on, mate. That's what you got? Psybeam? Yikes. He then proceeds to lose and storms off, but not before giving us one of his League cards. League cards are essentially new and improved trainer cards, and it's one of the items you'll collect a few handfuls of throughout your journey. So far, I've collected 6. Some on my rivals, some on the gym leaders, and some on other main characters like Leon and Rose. The flip side of their cards gives us a brief blurb about them, and they're used intelligently. For example, Bede's card gives some backstory about how his parents, quote-unquote, ran into some trouble when he was young, and so he was forced into an orphanage. Chairman Rose helped him by giving him a Pokemon, which inspired him, and it gives some contextualization for why Bede works so hard to impress the chairman at every chance he can. Other cards help you learn just a little bit more about gym leaders, and usually you get the cards before facing them, so it may give you some insight. Okay, that's maybe a stretch, but the League cards are a good bit of world building, so I like them. Plus, you can customize your own if you want, but I don't, because I'm not into it. Pushing further into the mind, we find a Galarian Stunfisk, which I've already mentioned, but I gotta say, I think it's a great design. It's no longer an electric and ground type, but instead a steel and ground type who masks itself by pretending to be a bear trap. It's a clever take on this mon, well done. Finally, we reach the tail end of Galar Mine 2 and find Team Yell blocking our path. We team up with Hop in a double battle to take them down, and I appreciate that 3 out of 4 of the Pokemon that they use are fully evolved. They actually managed to take down my habanero. I mean, I wasn't sweating it, I knew I would win, but at least it's something. We then get a chance to meet Kabu, the fire gym leader, and he's a stoic fellow who values hard work and training. When Hop says that many people have to drop out of the gym challenge because they can't beat Kabu, it feels right. This looks like a man who can not only talk the talk, but also walk the walk. I'm gonna come out and say it here, Kabu is my favorite gym leader in the game, from his character to his battle, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Before we reach him, we have to get through the Motostoke Outskirts. Saying it that way implies that this will be a stretched out and long area, but it's not. It's just 2 trainers and 2 patches of grass, which is fine since it's not a dedicated route. I actually like this area. It's one of the first where we see a bunch of bigger mons running around the grass, like Sawk, Noctowl, and Sudowoodo. It's also bathed in moonlight because, well, nighttime is approaching, but that kind of implies that you saw the opening ceremony, traversed routes 3, 4, 5, both Galar Mines, and the Motostoke Outskirts, and beat 2 gyms in the span of about 12 hours, I guess, assuming that the day and night system is comparable to Earth's. That is an insane amount of distance traveled in a very short amount of time. It's kind of jarring and makes it seem like the entirety of the Galar region is like the size of a single county in an American state. If Galar were a Pokemon, it might just be as small as Joltik. As we left Galar Mine 2, Hop informed us about the existence of Pokemon jobs, which is a new addition to the series, but it's one I imagine that will be forgotten in Generation 9 if I'm honest, but I digress. Pokemon jobs are a way for your Pokemon to get experience without having to use them in battle or even in your party at all. On each Rotom computer throughout Galar, you can find the Pokemon job listings. Here, companies around Galar ask people to send their Pokemon to help with odd jobs. For instance, a company trying to make fish netting may ask for bug Pokemon because they excel at creating nets. They will allow you to send a certain number of Pokemon on that job and select just how long the Pokemon will work for. While it's at its job, you won't be able to access the Pokemon at all, so it's best to send ones that are chilling in your Pokeboxes. You can send them for as long as 24 hours or as short as 1 hour, and upon return, they will gain experience that goes towards leveling up. Later in the game, you can even use Pokejobs to EV train Pokemon. From the way they introduce it with Carkol working in Galar Mine 2, to how they tie it into the corpocracy of Galar, Pokemon jobs are a good addition to this game on paper, but to be honest, they're so passive that they end up being forgettable. Still though, if you manage to remember they exist, it does provide another alternative to the daycare center to get more Pokemon leveled up faster, which is good for the competitive scene. Arriving back in Motostoke, it's time to hit the hay once again at the Budew drop-in before our big matchup with Kabu. It's here where we find Marnie and battle her for the second time. Her ace Pokemon is called Morpeko, which, in my opinion, has to be one of the stupidest Pokemon they've ever created. I hate it. It has two forms, Full Belly Mode and oh God, don't make me say it, please. Hangry Mode. There, are you happy? Its second form is Hangry Mode. It's one of the cringiest pop culture references I've ever seen in a Pokemon game. And the ability is essentially useless as it only changes the attack type of one of its moves. It's one of the most gimmicky things I have ever seen, and I hope the metagame has banished it to Poke-Hell. But Marnie is a pretty shy character too, and she has a lot of talent as a Pokemon trainer, and Team Yell follows her around endlessly, and that's still all we know about her at this point. The real battle in Motostoke, though, is with Kabu at his fire gym, and it's easily the best in the game. His gym challenge, though, is just alright. You have to go against other trainers and try to catch 3 Pokemon before any of them do. There really isn't a way to lose. The gym trainers either end up killing the Pokemon, which just means facing another one, or they end up losing as you succeed in catching the Pokemon first. I really think this was just Game Freak's way of giving people a chance to catch a Sizzlipede in a much easier way. Perhaps they knew it was one of their better designs, and therefore would be one of the most sought out new mons. The fight with Kabu shows glimpses of how Pokemon games could be designed if there was an emphasis on challenge. For a while now, you've heard things about how most of the gym challengers never make it past Kabu, and that he is the first real test of the gym challenge. He basically weeds out the contenders from the pretenders. Game Freak decided to back up those credentials by making all 3 of his Pokemon fully evolved. He's carrying a Ninetales, Arcanine, and Centiskorch. Ninetales' set is designed to do chip damage, as it has Will-O-Wisp and Fire Spin to trap in unsuspecting foes. Arcanine, on the other hand, is meant to be a fast physical sweeper with agility to boost his stats, and moves like Flame Wheel and Bite to get through teams. The fact that most of your Pokemon aren't fully evolved yet also means that your base stats will be significantly lower than that of Kabu's Mons. My only super effective move against his fire types is Torpedo's Aqua Jet, and so I know I'll have to come up with another way to win. I combo healing items with Habanero's Coil move to take out Arcanine, and if I limited myself by not using items, I for sure would have had to train my Pokemon more before tackling this gym. If the challenge wasn't hard enough, his final Pokemon, Centiskorch, doesn't just Dynamax, it Gigantamaxes, which means higher stats and a different form. This thing is a true threat. Luckily for me, it can hardly touch my boosted Sizzlipede, and I'm able to wait it out until the Pokemon devolves back into its base form. From there, Torpedo saves the day with some powerful Max Geyser attacks in its Dynamax form. Hopefully by explaining the strategy and thought process that I used during this battle, you're able to see that this gym requires way more thought than the first two, especially if you have a lack of rock, ground, and water type moves. Kabu's team is built to be stronger than you, and therefore requires more thought and effort to defeat it. It's more engaging because of that, and I wish all of the gym leaders had been built with a similar level of challenge. But with that out of the way, it's time to dip back in to the wild area. This venture into the wild area begins with a cutscene where it is implied that Hop and Bead are going to have a Pokemon battle. As we will come to see, Hop loses this battle, and his confidence is shaken for a good portion of the game after this, as he tries to escape living in the shadow of not only Leon, but also you. In other words, this battle is the catalyst for Hop's character development. It's a shame then that it's done completely out of view. I would have loved either a cutscene here showing the battle or being able to find it in the overworld to watch. That would have been amazing, seeing two other trainers battle from a sideline perspective. But of course not. Game Freak doesn't want to put that level of effort into their storytelling, and that's a shame. Last time we were here, I discussed some of the things I enjoy about the wild area, its positive components if you will. This time around, it's time to balance that out by bringing up all the negative components of this sprawling landscape. The first, and the one that bothers me the least, is that the wild area is usually ugly. In most weather conditions, it looks like shit compared to the detailed cities and routes we get outside of it. The bright sunshine is the only weather in which this place looks good, and even in those conditions, the tree textures that look like shit to us when we first saw them still look equally as terrible. In order to make this area stable, it seems that they had to cut back on the visuals in order to allow it to run and function properly, and it shows. Pokemon only load into the grass when you get close to the patches. NPC and overworld encounter Pokemon pop into existence out of nowhere when you approach them, and then get sucked into a different dimension when you walk away. On top of that, there are a bunch of different subsections that make up the wild area, and each of them is experiencing its own type of weather that changes every day. Sometimes you will walk from like a very sunny location right into a thunderstorm, and it feels so bizarre to have weather change this rapidly in this small of an area. All of these issues are jarring, that's the best word to describe them. It takes away from the believability of this landscape. For me personally though, the main issue I have with the wild area is not how these weather conditions look, but the mechanical consequences it has on each subsequent area. Certain Pokemon will only appear in certain subsections and in certain weather conditions. If you're looking for one of these particular Mons, you will find yourself experiencing one of the most frustrating components of the game, especially if you don't consult a guide. You may hear from a friend that a Pokemon like Dreepy, this generation's Dratini, can only be found in the wild area. If you don't know where to look or don't get the right weather conditions on the day you're searching for it, you simply will not find it. Compounding this issue is that some Pokemon are found exclusively in the wild area, meaning that you're gonna be forced to put up with this annoyance. If you don't want to cheese things, you'll have to wait till the next calendar day and pray you get the right weather conditions to spawn the Pokemon you want. And if not, guess what? You'll be waiting another day. Now sure, you can change the date on your Switch in order to get a different weather status to spawn, but no credit can be given to the game for this. You aren't intended to do that, and it's practically cheating. So if you want a Q-Fan, for example, but you don't want to cheese the game, and you don't want to progress without that new mon, you may have to wait a few days before you can continue, and I think that's so annoying. It's a huge misstep. And it just so happens I do want a Q-Fan, but since the game doesn't tell me where one will spawn and in what conditions, I have to turn to Cerebi. I stumble into its known location, only to find a thunderstorm, which doesn't lead to this Pokemon spawning. I advance my Switch's date one day forward, only to find rain, which also doesn't get me my elephant. I do this one more time, and I finally get the Pokemon I'm looking for, Q-Fan. It's a headache and a chore, and I hate that Game Freak locks some of its Pokemon off behind this tedium. That about sums up my issues with the wild area, but let me talk a bit about this Q-Fan. I'm nicknaming it Fanfi's Bro, because it's another elephant Pokemon. It begs the question that has been on the mind of series fans since probably Generation 5, is Game Freak running out of original ideas for Pokemon? Most Pokemon are based off of animals, and some of them have seen tons of use, like turtles, which I already mentioned. But you also have examples like this. Eskew is a penguin, but so was Empoleon. Q-Fan is an elephant, but so was Fanfi. Orbeetle is a ladybug, but guess what? Lady Ba has been around for a while. Grookey is a monkey, and we've seen the 3 elemental monkeys and Aipom before. Hell, Cinderace is basically Super Saiyan Diggersby. A lot of these recycled animals have been redesigned with a different type and passed off as new Pokemon, but with each new generation, we're seeing an increased familiarity, and it's starting to get stale. For me personally, the new Pokemon in this generation do feel pretty generic, most of them anyway, but I guess this is a problem that Game Freak was always going to run into by continuing this series. Still though, there's so many other animals and things to base Pokemon off of, so why not try some of them? Exiting the wild area brings us to Hammerlocke City, and it's a very striking locale with some beautiful castle architecture that is covered in a layer of sleek black paint. We stumble into a conversation with Chairman Rose, Bede, and Oleana that demonstrates just how much Bede wants to impress the chairman. We learn that Bede is collecting wishing stars at the behest of the chairman, and Oleana soon whisks the young boy away for his next venture. Rose tells us that Hammerlocke Gym doubles as an energy plant that supplies Galar with all its energy, and it doesn't really make that much sense, even after seeing the touted visual graphic that Rose supplies. He tells us to visit the gym leader Raihan at the vaults, and so we do just that. Sonia is here checking out the 4 ancient banners of Galar that Rose informed her about back in Hulbury. They depict the Darkest Day, an event in which Dynamax energy got out of flux and spawned a mysterious and terrifying storm. 2 heroes used a sword and shield to quell the evil force, and were eventually made kings in a crowning ceremony. Sonia deduces that these banners depict the Darkest Day, which is pretty obvious, and it amazes me that no one else in this whole region could have figured this out already, not even Professor Magnolia apparently. Later in the game, the events of the Darkest Day will replay themselves, and so scenes like this are meant to be foreshadowing of what's to come. However, their length is so short, and the story's so dull and boring, that it really feels like an afterthought. Every Pokemon game seems to need some kind of world-ending threat, and this one feels worse than any before, but more on that later. For now, that's about all there is to do in Hammerlocke, although I did decide to pick up some fresh new clothes, so let's move on to Route 6. This path is all about verticality, which I think is cool, but I wish they would have come up with a better way of doing it than just using ladders and one-way jump ledges, which we've seen before. Before we reach that though, Team Yao is blocking our path, and this scene is one of the funniest in the game. They hoot and holler about you being too loud, and they're afraid you'll wake up a sleeping Silicobra nearby. The irony, of course, being that they are the ones who are being outrageously loud. They challenge you to a battle, but right before that, Hop runs up, and we can see he's down in the dumps for the first time, and he elects to have you battle by yourself instead of alongside of him. It's clear that his loss to Bede in the wild area has taken a toll on him, and making you battle both Team Yao members is a nice way of blending storytelling with gameplay. After beating them, Hop says that losing to Bede wasn't the issue, but instead, what has him down is that he feels he is tarnishing his brother's name. The usual happy-go-lucky Hop is depressed and mopes off without the gusto we're used to him having. On Route 6, I decide to get some footage of me battling and catching wild Pokemon as an excuse to talk a little bit about the catch rate of Pokemon in Sword and Shield. To say it plainly, it can be very frustrating sometimes, and it's safe to assume catch rates have been decreased in these titles to make it tougher. On top of that, Pokemon in the wild, for seemingly the first time ever, are usually at or above the level of your Pokemon, meaning that it can be frustrating to whittle down their health without receiving lots of damage yourself. Plus, it seems like there just aren't as many Pokemon with status affliction moves that made catching Pokemon easier in previous generations. The go-to for many players will be Yamper's or Boltun's Nuzzle move, but I'm not using that Pokemon. It means you have to more heavily rely on getting an opposing Pokemon's health as low as possible, which is always a risky proposition. To make matters worse, access to Great Balls and Ultra Balls seems a little unbalanced. Once you unlock the ability to buy Great Balls at Pokemarts, they work well for some time. But eventually, Pokemon get so high leveled that Great Balls are ineffective, yet you haven't reached the point where you can buy Ultra Balls yet. All of these factors make catching Pokemon a slog sometimes for seemingly no reason but to annoy the player. I mean, earlier in the wild area, I found a Goldeen, and I tried catching it. I threw Pokeball after Pokeball at it only to see it escape, which was so annoying. It was a low-level Goldeen, for crying out loud. Why is it being so difficult? I know I'm not alone with this complaint, as I've seen it mentioned on Reddit a ton of times. Apparently, after beating the champion, Pokemon become way easier to catch, but by then, you're only doing it to fill out the Pokedex, and your Mons will be extremely over-leveled when attempting to do damage to wild Pokemon. I do manage to catch a Heatmor here though, but I don't really plan on using him. One feature I love is that you can now transfer Pokemon to and from the Pokebox from any locations outside of gym challenge areas. Because of this, I can drop Heatmor off in the Pokebox right in the middle of Route 6, instead of having to travel back to Hammerlocke's Pokecenter. To balance this out, Pokemon in the Pokeboxes are not automatically healed, which means you can't cheese free heals mid-route from switching them from box to party. It's a player-friendly mechanic that feels like a natural fit for the series. Route 6 is also home to the lady that can transform Pokefossils back into living creatures. Of course, I don't know why you would want to do that, because the fossil Pokemon in this generation are the ugliest we've ever gotten. And I don't just mean fossil Pokemon, I mean these are literally the worst designs Pokemon has ever created. Game Freak thought it would be a good idea to make it 2 sets of heads and 2 sets of bodies that can be mixed and matched to create up to 4 different Pokemon. The heads don't really go with the bodies though, and so it leads to these No Man's Sky looking creatures that are silently begging to be killed to be put out of their misery. This is one change I wish Game Freak hadn't have made. Just give us concise and well-designed Pokemon, not these terrifying amalgamations. Yes, I want the game studio to make changes to the series, like, I don't know, start us in a town with an ice landscape and lots of ice Pokemon. That would be fresh. This is just bad. One of these gruesome things is pretty broken in the metagame. Dracovish gets a move called Fishious Rend. Twice now, they've made me say something stupid in this video that I hate, and it's broken. It's a broken move. It has a base power of 85, but if it's used first, the power of it doubles to an insane 170 base power with a stab boost to boot. This thing dominates the meta, and only walls like Toxapex and Ferrothorn can seem to stand up to it. So not only is it ugly, but it's also broken. Oof. Well, that pretty much wraps up our Route 6 journey, although you gotta love this gargantuan statue of Diglett. Who made this? Why isn't there a Galarian Diglett that has legs yet? Food for thought. The next city we arrive in, Stow-On-Side, is a desert and clay-like town which features a homely marketplace, a Pokemon mural, and another gym. Before we can challenge it though, Hop asks us for a battle to reinvigorate his spirit. His team is entirely different here. He doesn't even have his Wooloo, and it's clear he's grasping at straws to find a strong team. By the battle's end though, he realizes that the only way to prevent his losses of affecting Lee is to get stronger himself and to forge a better connection with his Pokemon. His sad mode arc doesn't last terribly long, but it's a worthwhile inclusion and gives him some depth. With that, it's time to face B, the gym leader of Stow-On-Side. Now, if this were Pokemon Shield, we'd be getting ready for an encounter with Alistair, as for the first time ever, 2 of the gyms are exclusive to each game. In Sword, the 4th gym is Fighting type and the 6th is Rock type, while in Shield, the 4th gym is Ghost type and the 6th is Ice type. On paper, this sounds like a great idea. Throwing in a little variation may make 2 versions of the same game feel more worthwhile. A lot of Pokemon critics are opposed to having 2 versions and see it simply as a way for Game Freak and Nintendo to overinflate the sales and therefore the profit. Providing something more than version-exclusive Pokemon sounds like a good way to justify the 2 different games. However, in practice, it's very poorly executed here. The only difference between the 4th gyms and the 6th gyms is the actual leader and the Pokemon you face. The gym missions are literally the same in both games, with just a color palette swap. This was one of the most disappointing things about playing through Pokemon Sword for me, as I was hoping for some kind of new challenge within this gym mission, but it isn't. It's the same spinny wheel thing from Shield. Bia, or B, or Bay, however the hell you say it, herself makes for a good challenge, but mostly because 2 out of 5 of my Pokemon are weak to fighting, with nothing really offering much resistance except for Habanero. Luckily, I'm able to get a few coils up, heal up, and then proceed to sweep her entire team, including her Gigantamax Machamp. It literally goes Super Saiyan, and then dies in one hit. Hilarious. Bia, Alistair, Gordy, and Melody all become the most forgettable gym leaders in the games, even though you get to face 2 of them later on. Since they're version exclusives, Game Freak deemed it appropriate for them to have a very minimal role in the story, so you don't really see them outside of their gyms and the opening ceremony cutscene, which is a far contrast to leaders like Opal, Kabu, and Raihan. So really, the only difference that these version-exclusive gyms provide is a different set of type matchups, which feels very disappointing. It's a huge letdown to me. After collecting our 4th gym badge, a rumble from the Pokemon mural forces our hand and makes us investigate with Sonia. Up the stairs, we discover Bede attacking the mural with a Kaparaja, more specifically, Chairman Rose's Kaparaja. He's collecting more wishing stars, which are apparently trapped in the cliffside? It's never explained. But after beating him once again, the chairman, Oleana, and his henchmen soon show up, and Bede is disqualified from the gym challenge for wrecking the sacred Galar mural. Now, this scene is very confusing to me. It seems to me that Oleana asked Bede to do this back in Hammerlocke when she took him away. However, Bede never mentions that here, and it seems like that would be a pretty easy way to clear your name with the chairman, telling him that Oleana made him do it. Bede being in possession of the chairman's Pokemon only makes this more likely, but since he never brings it up, it doesn't seem like that's what transpired. The alternative, though, is that Bede simply wanted to get more wishing stars for the chairman, so he stole the Pokemon and had it attack the mural. The chairman shows up and reaps the reward of more wishing stars while keeping up his appearance by kicking Bede out of the tournament. But if this is true, how the hell did Bede get the chairman's Kaparaja? And why is it even listening to him if it was stolen from his trainer? It makes no sense to me because both options have plot holes in them. Also, it's pretty convenient that all of these characters just so happen to be here to witness Bede's crime. Either way, Bede is sent back to Hammerlocke for a trial, I guess. The cliffside then gives way, and a statue is revealed. And by the way, this commotion doesn't bring any of the recently departed people back. A statue of two wolf Pokemon holding a sword and shield, accompanied by the two kings, is unveiled. Sonia and you deduce that these creatures must have been Pokemon and contributed to ending the darkest day. Sonia questions why there's only one hero statue in the Beauty Drop-In if there were actually two heroes. It's easily chalked up to the fact that the darkest day occurred long ago, and the true account of it was probably lost and altered over time. It's as simple as that. The game, though, is trying to imply that someone covered up Galar's history by having the one hero statue and hiding these statues behind a cliffside with a mural deemed to be a Galarian landmark. If that's the case, though, why didn't the person just destroy these original statues instead of hiding them? I don't know, the whole thing is confusing and contrived, which is embarrassing given how simple the story is. With that, Sonia urges us to push forward to Ballonlea for our next gym battle. To get there, though, we'll have to make it through the Glimwood Tangle. Now, this is another one of those areas where Game Freak flexed and showed us how good an area can look in a Pokemon game. This dark forest is home to many ghost and fairy types, and even though this is the third generation of games to feature the fairy typing, we still haven't gotten an area that nailed their kind of aesthetic this well. It's weird, though, that this is one of the only areas, I'm pretty sure the only area in the game that doesn't have Pokemon roaming the overworld, which means everything relies on random encounters in tall grass. You can find a lot of Impidimps here, which I find to be one of their better designs and lineages that this generation brought to the table. You can breeze through the Glimwood Tangle in about 2 minutes if you want, as only one trainer battle stands in your way. This battle does result in a double evolution of Cufant and Thwackey into Kaparaja and Rillaboom. And with that, my team is pretty much fully evolved with only one more team member to collect. Like I said, you can rush through this area, but exploring gets you a lot of new TMs and items. The thing I want to highlight in this area, though, is just how disjointed it feels from Stow-On-Side. You go from being in a desert town to a lush, vibrant forest in a matter of footsteps, and it's so jarring to see this rapid of a change in the landscape. It's not the only time that the game does something like this, too. One of the later routes is notorious for it, and it goes from like a normal plain grassy area to a set of ancient desert ruins to an ice location in the span of one route. I guess Game Freak feels the need to incorporate all these types of landscapes into each game, but it feels more disjointed here than ever before. It's like they didn't even try to make this region make sense from a geographical and climate perspective. It makes Galar's topography feel artificial, and it takes away from the game because of it. I mentioned this a while back, but I'd love to see the series start the player in a location that isn't a boring, generic little town, but instead like an icy part of the region, or near a volcano. Something different would be appreciated, and it would allow for the first route or two to have something different than a Pidgey and a Rattata. Will they ever do this? Probably not. but it's something I'd love to see. Departing the Glimwood Tangle takes us to the little town of Ballonlea. By the way, the keyword there is little. We can only go into the Pokemon Center, 2 houses, and the gym. And those 2 houses do contain an Eviolite and a Choice Scarf though, so they're worth venturing into. Really, there isn't much to talk about outside of the gym in this town, but luckily, it's a good one, my second favorite in the game. The gym leader, Opal, is one of the more memorable ones as we've already bumped into her a few times during our journey. She tells us that she's looking for a replacement, someone to take over the fairy gym in the next year's gym challenge. Her mission then is about finding her ideal replacement, but hilariously, most of her qualifying questions are bizarre, like, what does she have for breakfast and how old is she? These questions are asked to you while you battle her gym trainers. Answering successfully gets you a stat boost, while the opposite for wrong answers. She calls it spicing up her battles with a bit of fairy magic. To say Opal lacks a lot of character would be a huge lie. She's fantastic and I love her design, she's full of energy and she's fanatic, and I just think she's a great character. It's also just interesting to get a little insight to how gym leaders are replaced, and as we find out here, they get to choose who takes over their gym after they step down. I've already said how well this gym focuses on the narrative and background principles of gyms and their structure, and this is another example of how Game Freak exemplifies it in Sword and Shield. Her battle can be challenging, but Caparaja makes quick work of it with its Dynamaxed version of Heavy Slam, Max Steel Strike. It pretty much wipes the floor with Opal's team, and even her gigantic cape can't stand in her way. After she loses, she tells us that we didn't really make the cut to be the next gym leader, but she does hint that she has someone else in mind. Okay, I get it, I haven't talked about Dynamaxing yet, but hold on for just a little bit longer, I'm getting there, I promise. You know what, we'll talk about it at the next gym. For now, we have to return to Hammerlocke for some story progression. We get treated to an excellent cutscene where Opal drags Bede to Ballonlea to train to become the next gym leader. His pink coat finally did him a favor, and it sets up the final arc of Bede's development. Opal does mention though that Oleana screwed Bede over, which kinda confirms that she gave him the chairman's Caparaja and told him to destroy the mural. Why he never mentioned this is beyond me. Further on, we find Sonia and are just chatting it up when an explosion occurs in the gym stadium that shakes the ground, and for once in a Pokemon game, the adults decide it's not a child's responsibility to go and figure out what the hell's going on. Leon and Sonia just tell you to continue onward to Circhester and that they will deal with whatever's going on. So that's what we do, which brings us to another battle with Hop. You can tell he's starting to get back into the groove and coming to understand that it's not just about which Pokemon he trains, but how he leads them. He vows to get stronger and runs off. This finally brings us to Route 7, and it's very short because we can only explore half of it for now. Team Yell blocks the other half, and this kind of encounter pops up everywhere in Galar. That's because a lot of the routes are either circular or stem from one central location, meaning that if they want you to progress in a linear way, something has to serve as a roadblock. A few generations ago, they removed the need for HMs, and therefore the natural obstacles no longer can function as a blockade to progression. They wouldn't make sense, so now we get these weird interactions where people won't let us pass through certain locations until we reach the appropriate part of the story. At least here, Team Yell's attempts to impede the progress of all gym challengers, outside of Marnie of course, is a nice way of contextualizing these blockades. Even with that considered though, it still feels like a series of invisible walls. Fans who desperately want Pokemon to go more open world will find these invisible walls more annoying with each and every release. After defeating the 2 trainers on Route 7, it's pretty much cleared out for now, and so we can march onward to Route 8. So Route 8 is home to that weird geographical mess I mentioned earlier, where it goes from grasslands to desert ruins to snowy mountains, all in a few steps. There really isn't much to talk about in these areas. Phalanx appears here and it's basically a bunch of Kirbys. That's about it. So I wanted to talk about something kinda important here, the battle mechanics within Pokemon. More specifically, why super effective moves continue to be a strength and weakness for the series, and how brain-dead AI drags down the battle system. So as we know, each Pokemon type has other types that it is strong against and weak to. Fire beats grass, grass beats water, water beats fire. It's the standard Pokemon has used since its inception, and that's the way it's always been. It doesn't matter which NPC you battle within the game, the dominant strategy will always be to try to connect on super effective moves since they do significantly more damage and are the easiest path to victory. There are of course other ways to go about engaging in battle. You can set up hazards, you can use moves that drain health over time like Toxic, you can even try to set up Pokemon to sweep with stat boosts. However, it seems that a vast majority of players will never engage with these other moves and mechanics because super effective hits are easier to understand and faster to engage with. These other strategies may be useful in the meta, but for the main games, super effective moves remain supremely useful. There is no incentive to play around with other strategies or try something different within the games because one tactic is so much more powerful than all the others. Not only does this encourage players to stick with spamming super effective moves instead of trying new strategies, but it also trivializes the difficulty of the games because the AI opponents never switch out, and usually their teams do not have any kind of type diversity. This means that most battles will play out as follows. The battle starts, you switch to a Pokemon with a super effective move, you spam that move against their monotype team until the battle is over. To me, this is the core issue. Not that super effective moves are so dominant, but that the AI simply isn't programmed to respond competently or given teams that carry multiple types. I mean, the type advantage system on paper is great because it truly is a series of checks and balances that can be utilized strategically. However, the NPCs never play smart. They just send out their Hippowdon to be slaughtered in a barrage of grass and water type moves and don't even bat an eye while doing so. To me, this is why Pokemon truly needs a difficulty setting, because overhauling the battle system isn't necessary because it's pretty damn good on its own. But for players who want to challenge themselves, a difficulty setting could allow for so much more customization for the way they want to play. I doubt Game Freak will ever do this, but I'd love to see it, and see it done well. I don't want them to just give NPCs higher level Pokemon. Give them teams of 3 to 6 Pokemon, and make them have a strategy that needs to be overcame in order to claim victory. As it is now, every trainer in the wild has 1 or 2 Pokemon, and gets smoked, and it just makes Pokemon a brainless game. Identify the weakness, exploit the weakness, rinse and repeat. That's fine for some players, even me sometimes, but I'd love to see Pokemon offer dedicated fans a more challenging experience if that's what they want. The battle system on offer here is fantastic, but Game Freak rarely ever lets it flex its true capabilities, and that's why we need difficulty sliders in this game. Empower the player to play the way they want to. With that, we arrive in the snowy town of Circhester, which is home to Gordy's Rock Gym. This is where I finally want to share my input on Dynamaxing, and let me sum it up by saying, I think it ended up being a decent idea that was made better by the way it was implemented. Generation 6 introduced Mega Evolutions, and it made the PvE a cakewalk, while these same creatures dominated the PvP scene. A select few Pokemon were given incredible stat boosts and abilities that made them essentially mandatory in PvP. If you didn't show up with a Mega Evolution, you put yourself at a severe disadvantage when compared to those who brought one. It wreaked havoc on the metagame, and many longtime competitive battlers couldn't wait for them to be removed. To make matters worse, only a select few Pokemon got Mega Evolutions, and so it was easy for some folks to feel like their favorite Pokemon were left behind. Going into Generation 7, Game Freak knew that continuing to introduce more and more Mega Evolutions would destroy the metagame. Still, they wanted to have something to market, and therefore we got Z-moves, which were ultra-powerful attacks that could be used once per battle. Despite their damage potential, Z-moves never really felt as flashy or as cool as Mega Evolution, and sitting through drawn-out attack animations every time you used one got old fast. Plus, Z-moves were deeply tied into the culture of the Alola region, meaning their appearance in Galar really wouldn't make any sense. They knew that they needed a big hook to market as a new change to battling in Generation 8, and therefore we got Dynamaxing and Gigantamaxing. They basically said, hey, let's combine the idea of Mega Evolutions and Z-moves into one, and then balance it so it doesn't completely break the meta. When I first heard about Dynamaxing though, I felt it was pretty stupid. It looked like Pokemon, but big. Big deal, I thought to myself. However, they went about implementing it into the games in a very intelligent way. First of all, Dynamaxing is limited to fights relating to the gym challenge, whether it be with gym leaders or in the final tournament. This means that you can't just Dynamax on any random trainer and completely destroy their team. That would get old fast. Since you don't get to Dynamax very often, it feels more worthwhile because it's not a strategy that's always available to you. To improve it further, the max attack moves are stunning and very well animated, yet they don't drag out for so long as to become annoying. The visual design of them does a great job of portraying their power, and when two Dynamax Pokemon are going at it, it truly feels like two Goliaths going to war with each other. It's fantastic. On top of that, you can Dynamax any Pokemon, meaning that no one's favorite Mon gets left out. Sure, not all of them can Gigantamax, but at least every fan can have their favorite Pokemon go Super Saiyan. Well, you know, if they're in the game, that is. Oof. Anyway, Dynamaxing only lasts for 3 turns, meaning that it isn't always viable to expect a sweep after transforming your Pokemon. You get 3 turns to cause as much damage as possible before reverting back to your original form. This limitation makes it so that Dynamaxing isn't a strategy that you can solely rely on, especially in the competitive scene. Sure, it can change the tide of a battle with the increased stats and the super powerful moves, but really it can't outright win you or cost you a match. It ultimately feels like we got the best of both worlds. We have Mega Evolutions and Z-moves rolled into one and implemented in a way that doesn't spell disaster for the game's ability to challenge you or the ability to enjoy a balanced metagame. Bravo! Dynamax Evolution ended up being a great addition to Pokemon, and I wouldn't hate it if they continued it in later releases. Anyway, defeating Gordy and his Gigantamax Colossal rewards us with our 6th gym badge. Outside, we run into Sonia, who asks us to have dinner with her at a local restaurant called Bob's Your Uncle. This location sticks out like a sore thumb, not just in Circhester, but in Pokemon as a whole. It just seems like a misnomer. Anyway, it just so happens in this restaurant that there is a 5th tapestry that the owner says he got at a yard sale. You're really telling me that this ancient banner of Galar that would be sought after by every historian in the region is just chilling here in this guy's restaurant? In a region where it takes 10 minutes to walk each route, no one of importance has ever noticed this here and demanded to bring it to the Hammerlocke vault for safekeeping. I'm not buying it. Although I do love how we can fake Sonya out and comment on the Bob's Your Uncle poster Very cheeky move, Game Freak. Sonia comments on how the banner most likely depicts the moment when the heroes of Galar sealed away the sword and shield relic so that their power may not be misused by man, but called upon once more in an hour of need. It jogs Hop's memory of our encounter in the Slumbering Weald, and Sonia wants to go check it out for herself and collect more information on the Foggy Woods. First though, she wants to check out the local Heroes Bath, where the game comes up with a weak excuse for you to battle Hop again. So just like the other 4 or 5 times we faced him, we defeat him, and he mopes around before being encouraged to keep trying. With that, it's off to Route 9. Route 9 is one of the longest and more unique pathways in the game because most of it is only traversable by water. Before we get to that though, we're running out of routes, which means I should probably spend a little bit of time discussing Pokemon camping, this game's follow-up to the Pokemon Ami function from the 6th and 7th generation. Inspired by the nights spent out in the wild by Ash and his Pokemon, this game introduces a camping feature where you and your Mons can pitch a tent, play around, and prepare curry to your heart's content. I think they meant for this to be a more grandiose experience, an upgrade to Pokemon Ami, but really it feels kinda tacked on, at least to me. You spawn into this area and you can watch your Pokemon move around. Pokemon can be called over to your location, where you can play with them by holding up a feather on a stick or playing catch with them. Waving around your Joy-Con to entertain your Pokemon does nothing for me, and it's kind of painful to watch some of these Pokemon animations as they turn back to you to return the thrown ball. Centiskorch in particular looks really awkward as its lengthy body struggles to spin around to face you. It's a feature that's enjoyable for all of 5 minutes before you never want to pick it up again. The other half of Pokemon camping is making curry and filling out your curry decks. I'm not kidding, there's a curry dex. This involves picking one key ingredient and some berries to give your concoction flavor, and then preparing it by fanning the flames, stirring the pot, and of course, adding a dash of love. Experimenting with different ingredients yields different kinds of curries that each give benefits, like healing your Pokemon's HP, curing status afflictions, and giving experience. Nothing too crazy. Just like the toy mode, it's something that doesn't entertain me. The beauty of Pokemon Ami was the simplicity. You could pop in, pet your Pokemon, feed them a berry, and get out quickly. It wasn't a nuisance, it was meant to check up on them. This feels too involved. I don't really want to go through these 3 steps just to feed my Pokemon, especially since it comes without the satisfaction of watching them eat it in real time like it did in Ami. Unfortunately, Pokemon camping feels like a letdown to me, and I didn't enjoy it very much. Eventually, we come to a Team Yell member harassing a Dreadnought, and after beating him, the doctor upgrades our bike to allow us to traverse water. This route is completely designed around that function, and I love that the bike automatically transforms into its boat version when you hit water. Finally, the days of spamming the A button on every body of water till you're surfing are over. I don't really have much else to say about this route though. You can find some new Pokemon like Eskew, Pinkerchin, and Graplock, but all of them are pretty weak designs in my opinion. I mean, Pinkerchin has a butt face, like come on. I do have to show this route some love though, because it is one of the longer routes in the game, with a bunch of trainers to face, and items hidden all over the place. Route 9 leads into Spikemuth, the location of our 7th gym challenge. Upon arrival though, we find the city is on lockdown. Luckily, Marnie is nearby and offers us a way in if we can beat her in battle. She tells us that she was born in Spikemuth and therefore knows all of its secrets. After defeating her, we can get into the city and see just how derelict it is. No one's here except for a bunch of Team Yell goons. Team Yell is revealed to be the fan/gym trainers of the Spikemuth gym, and their entire goal was to impede the progress of other gym challengers so that Marnie could get a huge lead. Of course, seems obvious because they never tried to hide that fact. Team Yell is just kind of average to me. I don't love them, but I don't hate them. It seems like Game Freak didn't want to do another evil team in this generation, but still wanted to pay homage to it somehow, so we get Team Yell, who are a bunch of well-intentioned knuckleheads who just want to cheer on their biggest hero, Marnie. It makes for a pretty uninspired gym challenge though. Battle a few Team Yell members, that's it. Team Yell doesn't do much for me, but I do appreciate the attempt at something new for a Pokemon game's quote-unquote evil team. Speaking of new, Spikemuth's gym is the first ever Dark-type gym in the entire Pokemon series. The Dark-type has been around since Generation 2, and it seems crazy that they have never given us one until now. I mean, we've had so many water, fire, rock, and grass gyms, it's bizarre that they never snuck a Dark-type in there somewhere. Piers is the gym leader here, and he's a lot better than his opening cinematic depicts. I hate this cutscene. It perfectly shows off why Game Freak needs to consider using voice actors in the next set of games. I mean, this is supposed to be a rock concert, yet there's no vocal and there's hardly any music. It's incredibly jarring and ultimately pretty cringy. Piers is excited to see a trainer though, and explains that his gym does not believe in Dynamaxing, which is a really interesting idea. A leader who opposes the traditional form of Pokemon battling in Galar. I wish this was more fleshed out, but he basically just says that he doesn't believe in it, and that battling can still be enjoyable without it, and that's about all we get. It suggests that Piers must be a very talented trainer, because in order to be the 7th gym leader, he must have beaten the previous 6, who all used Dynamax. A nice touch is that he does comment on what he wants his Pokemon to do as they enter battle. Like the rest, he eventually loses to us, and we claim our next gym badge. It's revealed that Marnie is Piers' younger sister, to the shock and awe of no one. I don't really get why they hid Piers in the Gym Challenge's opening cutscene. It's not like most people didn't see this coming, considering Team Yell's logo is one of the banners on the outside of Motostoke Stadium. I guess Game Freak thought this made Marnie's character much more interesting, to the point that they didn't need to give her an arc or much to do at all. She's easily the most forgettable rival to me, despite the fact that she's meant to be the closest to our power level. Ultimately, the impact that Piers, Team Yell, and Marnie were supposed to have ends up feeling flat and mismanaged, as if there was supposed to be something more to them. On our way out of town, a loud kaboom, similar to the one we heard earlier, echoes off in the distance. A random NPC drags us to a cutscene with Leon, where he tells us not to worry, and that he's going to rush off to stop it. And with that, we head back to Hammerlocke. We're then treated to the most egregious case of the game telling us something happened instead of just showing us. If ever there were a moment to deservedly call Game Freak lazy, this would be it. From when Leon runs off to the time we exit the Route 9 tunnel, maybe a minute has passed. Yet, in this time, Leon apparently defeated a Dynamax Berserker that was rampaging around Hammerlocke's eastern half. Unfortunately, we never get to see even a glimpse of what must have been an epic confrontation between the Rogue Berserker and Leon's Dynamax Charizard. Instead, Hop shows us a news article on his phone where Leon is standing next to the defeated cat Behemoth. It looks piss poor too. They just took Berserker's Dynamax form and turned it sideways. It's awful. When you take a second to think about how time works, the scene is even more lackluster. In the 1 minute walk it took to get there, Leon fought the Berserker, got his photo taken, and news publishers had enough time to type up full articles on the situation. It feels incredibly half-assed. Why not show us the battle in a memorable cutscene instead of telling us what happened and showing us a shitty, low-quality picture of two character models with a backdrop? When people say these are the laziest games Game Freak has ever pushed to market, it's moments like these that make it hard to argue against that. Anyway, the adults decide to investigate further into why wild Pokemon are suddenly Dynamaxing in Hammerlocke and encourage you to go fight Raihan for the last badge. It's been, all of 7 minutes since we beat the last gym leader, and already it's time to fight another. Like I said earlier, the pacing is bonkers. The idea of gym missions was so cool. It was a brilliant way of incorporating Alola's trials into the gym format. It's a shame then that the final 2 gym missions boil down to battle other trainers. In Pierre's challenge, you fought against Team Yell members, and in Raihan's gym challenge, you fight his pupils, although it's in the double battle format. I guess it makes good practice for what's to come in your fight against the dragon training hipster, but it feels so anticlimactic. Raihan himself, though, feels like a really great challenge to wrap up the gym challenge because his team is thoughtfully constructed and he matched up against my team very favorably. He fights you in the double battle style and uses a Sandaconda, Gigalith, Flygon, and his ace, Duraludon. I would have loved to see his Flygon replaced with a Dragapult, but it's fine. This combination of Pokemon makes Raihan feel like the first multi-type gym leader featuring both ground and dragon-type creatures. His team is all about chipping away at your Pokemon's health by keeping up sandstorms, while also hitting you hard with a variety of physical attacks, including dragon, rock, ground, steel, and fighting-type attacks. This presented a true challenge that hasn't been felt since Kabu's gym. In fact, Raihan was the only gym leader to ever defeat the Pokemon I Dynamaxed. In this case, it was Caparaja. Without the advantage of being able to use revives, I wouldn't have beat him on this first try, which makes him round out the top 3 for the best gym leaders in the game, alongside of Opal and Kabu. As we wrap up our final gym battle, let me sum it up by saying that this is easily the best implementation of the gym challenge in any Pokemon game. It's so much more realized this time around, and that's due to a few reasons. First, experiencing encounters with gym leaders outside of their gym has been made a point of focus to solidify their impact on the Galar region. They don't just feel like strong trainers who stay in their gym. They move around the region and influence it heavily. Second, gym battles are made into a spectacle that many people gather to watch as if it were the Super Bowl. The flashy nature of them makes it hard not to get caught up in. Finally, and I think this is the biggest reason, the gym challenge is so well imagined and constructed and gives us more insight into the Pokemon universe. They use linearity to their advantage by weaving a narrative around why we battle gyms in the order that we do, and why gym leaders are ranked in the way that they are. All the background detail and information makes this whole setup feel believable in a way that Pokemon games never have before. Well done. Exiting the gym, we run into Sonia, who is given her grandmother's lab coat as a vote of confidence in her ability to discover what's causing the red light and Dynamaxing issues in Galar. Sonia vows to get to the bottom of it, and begins to wonder if the events of the Darkest Day are replaying themselves once more. The story continues to dilly-dally and drag along, but don't worry, soon it will try to rush everything into the ending. The game then decides to forego the Victory Road cliché and instead has one final route leading up to the location of the game's finale. It's on the icy walkways of Route 10 where I catch my final team member, Mr. Mime, who I am nicknaming Old Man because I can't come up with anything better. Originally, I planned to catch a Stone Yawner here, but I realized that it would leave my team with a glaring weakness to fighting types and with no special attackers. That's kind of a shame though, because I do really like Stone Yawner's design, clearly inspired by Stonehenge, and its Pokedex description all but confirms that these creatures make up the ancient monument. It really sucks then that it's locked behind a 2% encounter rate, making it nearly impossible to find. Unlike Sizzlipede, it doesn't have a cool way to lure it out. You just gotta get lucky, and that's stupid. I hate when Game Freak locks cool Pokemon behind tedious things like that, because I love Stone Yawner's look. I've caught attention to a few of the new Pokemon throughout this commentary, but overall, I don't think Generation 8 really wows me. In fact, most Pokemon I either really like or really dislike, with not many in between. Out of the 81 new Mons introduced in Sword and Shield, I personally only like the designs of 41 of them, which is just barely over half. Too many of them feel like knockoffs of other Pokemon, or they just fail the basic Pokemon eye test. You know what I mean? There's Pokemon designs where you look at it and you say, yes, that's a Pokemon. Well, a lot of these new ones miss that mark. Route 10 is home to some pretty strong trainers who use a lot of fully evolved Pokemon, and it makes for a decent warm-up for what's to come and gets your team some extra levels before reaching the conclusion of the main story. I don't really have much more to say about this route than that. It's fairly underwhelming compared to the challenge of Victory Roads in previous titles, but whatever. I guess I'll take this opportunity to say something random that I'm not sure fits well into any other part of this video. I really wish Pokemon would introduce multiple save files for crying out loud. This is perhaps the simplest of features that Game Freak remains stubborn on implementing, most likely because having only one save file available encourages people to buy both versions. It's kind of an underhanded move towards the fanbase and serves as a way to milk the customer for $60 more, which doesn't feel great. I don't think Game Freak will ever allow us to have more than one save file, and it's a design choice that continues to irk me. You can make multiple profiles on your Switch to get around this issue, but just like with altering the Switch's calendar to change up the wild area weather, Game Freak does not get credit for something that isn't a part of the actual game. Route 10 gives way to the beautiful city of Wyndon, which is inspired by London. It's the biggest city area in the game, and while there's a lot of shops and buildings to check out, there really isn't much to uncover. Besides, Hop tells us to rush to the Wyndon Stadium for the semifinals, and so that's what we do. I really don't like the inclusion of that line. Wyndon is a big place, and it's only natural for players to want to explore it. Maybe the developers knew it was as wide as an ocean, but about as deep as a puddle when it came to exploring, so they just wanted to save you some time. The way the game handles the semifinals is more evidence towards the game feeling unfinished and rushed. For starters, I've spent only about 14 hours on this save file so far, and here I am standing outside of the final part of the main story. Sure, they will drag this bit out for a few hours, but still, Pokemon Adventures used to be a good 30 to 40 hours, and so this one feels decidedly short, which isn't great for a game that was already facing a lot of heat from the fanbase. Anyway, the point here is that we reach the stadium, register for the cup, and then get thrust right into our first semi-final match. I just arrived in Wyndon literally 3 minutes ago, and I'm already facing Marnie in the semi-finals. Can you see why this game feels so rushed and its pace so broken? There's no build-up or sense of excitement. You just get teleported into the waiting room and then go out onto the pitch for your first match. Marnie's Dark-type team doesn't prove to be too much of a threat, and it doesn't help her cause that she only brings 5 Pokemon. I don't know why Game Freak continues to think it's logical for people in a tournament with this high of stakes to not carry a full team. It's illogical and gives you as a player a huge advantage. Another thing I dislike about past rivals, and these rivals, Marnie in particular, is that they all talk a big game before the match about how much it means to them to beat you. And then, when they lose, they immediately defer to you and talk about how if they lost, they were glad it's to you. Let me put it bluntly, I wish the game would stop hamming the player up like this all the time. I would love to see Marnie get pissed or show some emotion upon losing instead of just immediately accepting her defeat. She's worked so hard, spent her whole life training under her older brother for the gym challenge, went on this journey to collect every single badge and try to break out of her brother's shadow. She deems you to be a worthwhile rival and sets her sights on not only beating you, but becoming the new champion of the Galar Region. She's so determined that she even forgoes her brother's offer to become the new gym leader of Spikemuth, which would be a huge move for her Pokemon career. All of these factors come to a boil in your semi-final match, and then you beat her, and all she has to say is, well, I'm glad we could give the audience a good show. Bullshit. Bullshit. I'm tired of rivals behaving in this way. From there, we're hustled into our next match against Hop, with the winner being the one who gets to enter the actual Champions Cup. We get like 3 throwaway lines from our biggest rival before we're sent back out for another match. Again, I gotta reiterate, the pacing is lightning quick and carries no meaning. Hop's battle is one of the more disappointing ones. Throughout the game, we've continued to best him by swapping Pokemon out and utilizing super effective moves. He's even commented on it every time, saying things like, "You already know about type matchups?" and "I should have known you'd go for a super effective move." So you would think, after spending the whole game talking about learning from Leon's battles and trying to become a better trainer, he would actually play smarter here to avoid being at a type disadvantage. But of course he doesn't. Pokemon games always sacrifice the narrative for gameplay ease when it comes to these high-stake moments because the player is meant to feel like the greatest trainer that has ever lived. They act like you're something special when really everyone else around you battles in the least efficient and effective way as possible. Just like Marnie, Hop eventually falls to you and says some generic lines about how great the journey has been and how he's so happy for you. The whole game, he's had a fiery, burning passion to be the Galar champion and beat his brother and write his own legend, and he rolls over here like a limp dog after you beat him. I get it, I'm harping on this point now, but it's ridiculous that the whole personality and history of characters becomes irrelevant as soon as you beat them. Leon congratulates us and says he hopes we get to face him in the final match and extends an invite to us to dine with him. We wait for him at the nearby hotel, but he never shows up. Piers arrives and tells us that Leon was going to Rose Tower, and agrees to escort us there to find out what the deal is. Outside of the hotel, we're ushered into one of the worst cases of padding throughout the game. We run into Oleana, who tells us that Leon is in a meeting with Rose, and is not to be interrupted. Instead of just leaving it at that, she downright says, "I am leaving a key to get into the tower with this random goon. A gym challenge staff member who is basically bad. I guess?" He runs off and we have to find him 3 separate times in the plaza with a battle accompanying each one. It's one of the most basic ideas they could have came up with and they just rolled with it. Why does Oleana even give them a chance to get into the tower? Why do we keep letting this guy run away after defeating him each time? There's no good answers to these questions. It's just padding to try to artificially increase the playtime by like 15 minutes. It's terrible, but once we get the key, Piers puts on one of his silent and awkward cutscenes to clear a path to the Rose Tower for us. The tower is impressive looking on the outside, but completely empty on the inside, at least from what we see. There's a giant cliche elevator where we have to battle different gym challenge staff members who double as employees that work in the businesses that Rose oversees. It turns out Rose is the chairman of a company called Macrocosmos, and I guess they're the bad guys now? They behave as if Rose is a commanding officer, when really, he's just their boss. And trust me, nobody is this dedicated to their boss. To make this section feel worse, the music and sound is underwhelming, and most of the grunts repeat the same line multiple times about how nobody works harder than them. It feels so generic and lazy, not to mention Rose hasn't been properly established as an evildoer or a bad guy, so all of this just feels so ham-fisted and awkward. We've gone the whole game with Rose doing nothing worse than saying offhand comments about Galar's future, and now apparently he's off the rocker, but I'm getting ahead of myself. The point I'm trying to make here is that the game spent its whole duration up to this point doing nothing to push the story forward or motivate us to get involved. And now it's trying to rush everything into the last few hours and tie it up with a nice little bow on top. And it fails miserably from a storytelling perspective. At the top of the elevator, we emerge into another big empty room where Oleana awaits us, guarding us against the chairman. Although you can't really tell he's here because they don't show his model anywhere in this shot. She tells us that we can't be allowed to interrupt the chairman's meeting, and keep in mind, we've done all of this simply to find Leon since he was late for dinner. I at least enjoy the battle with Oleana because she does have some type diversity on her team, but once again, she's no match for the dominant strategy of the title. Her Gigantamax Garbodor does go down eventually, and she has no choice but to let us progress. We're then shown a cutscene that's presented in a format unlike any others we've seen before. We get these still shots with written narration over top, and it feels completely out of place. They probably did this because there's nothing else interesting to look at the top of the tower, so they just came up with some art depicting this scene, and it makes it pop more. Unfortunately, since it's unlike any other cutscenes we've watched, it once again, say it with me, feels jarring. Rose and Leon are talking, and the chairman reveals that he wants to cancel the final tournament the next day in order to save Galar from running out of energy in 1,000 years. Did you get that? Because I certainly didn't. Rose, for some reason, believes that by not canceling the Champions Cup final, the region will lose power in 1,000 years, and he's so worried about this future event that he won't even be alive for, that he's determined to cancel the festival. There's no correlation between the two. It makes no sense to anyone with half a brain. Leon acts as a conduit for the player when he basically calls out the chairman, says it makes no sense, and chooses not to go along with it. Game Freak, what the hell were you thinking with this turn in the narrative? I'm not sure if they're trying to send a message about conservation, but if so, it's the wrong one. You portray Rose as the one who's worried about the future, but he's the villain for doing so. It's nonsensical. No matter how you look at it, Rose's concerns are just examples of really bad writing. Eventually, his plan will make a bit more sense, but with the way it's displayed here, it comes off as utterly ridiculous. As we depart the tower, Rose mumbles that he will change the course of history. The next day comes and it's time for the final tournament. Sword and Shield opts to replace the traditional Elite Four style challenge with a much more public event. A grand tournament in the biggest stadium in all of Galar, where everyone watches their favorite trainers do battle. I kinda like this tournament style approach, and it feels very fresh after facing so many Elite Four challenges before this. Just like I extended praise to the Gym Challenge, I must also do the same for the Champions Cup. It's a great idea, and it's a new flavor of an old recipe. Before we can get started with it though, Bede interrupts the proceedings and challenges you to a high-stakes match, where he vows to only continue training Pokemon if he can defeat you in battle. Leon approves the impromptu battle, and it commences shortly after. Bede is working to become the next leader of the Fairy Gym, and so it's fitting that his partner Pokemon, Hatterene, incorporates his old preferences of psychic types as well as his new one with a fairy typing. While his team isn't anything too difficult for us to handle, I really appreciate Bede's arc. He's the best character in the game. He's been a jerk to us the whole time, but it's clear that he had a traumatic childhood and that Oleana took advantage of him, and it makes us kind of sympathetic towards him. Now he's in a position where he's training to become even stronger, surrounded by a group of people at the Fairy Gym who really appreciate him. It makes for a nice conclusion to this character's arc. Bede decides not to live up to his promise of quitting after losing to us, and vows only to keep pushing forward. This moment, unlike so many others, feels earned. From there, we have to defeat 3 gym leaders in order to get a crack at facing Leon. We end up facing Nessa, Bia, and Raihan once more throughout the tournament. I knew this lineup was coming, and that was a big factor for why I chose Mr. Rhyme as my final team member. His psychic moves make short work of Bia's fighting type mons, and the ice move Freeze Dry is super effective against most of Nessa and Raihan's teams. The first 2 gym leaders don't really put up much of a challenge, but Raihan at least tries. His goal is once again to set up weather effect moves in order to gain an advantage over you. But it proves fruitless, as taking 2 turns to set up weather and stat boosting moves is more than enough time to dispose of most of his mons with, once again, super effective hits. I don't really have much else to say about these battles. They're just tougher versions of the previous encounters, so let's move on. It's almost time for our big battle against Leon, but as we prepare to take on the champion himself, an emergency broadcast is picked up by the stadium. We see Chairman Rose, and he plainly informs us that he's, go ahead and casually brought about the darkest day to save Galar, and then he promptly shoves off. The game spent all that time establishing the background of the Galar region, the darkest day, the 2 heroes, the sword and shield relics, and all that crap, because it wanted to set up the sequel to that event for the finale. The idea of having you and Hop be the reincarnations of the 2 legendary heroes proved too tempting to resist, and Game Freak went full steam ahead on it. The problem, though, is in its execution. Chairman Rose acts as the catalyst for bringing about the darkest day, but as we'll see, his plan never makes a lick of sense. Wondering what to do next, you and Hop venture back to the Slumbering Weald to recruit the help of the legendary Pokemon. After making your way to the back of the forest, you and Hop uncover ancient relics of a sword and shield and decide to take them. This is one part of the story that actually does kind of make sense. The legendary Pokemon hide away in this area using fog, and only worthy heroes can reach it in order to call upon their help. With that, we head back to Hammerlocke Stadium for a showdown with Rose. He tells us that he's been collecting wishing stars in order to awaken a legendary Pokemon called Eternatus, who is responsible for bringing about the original Darkest Day. It's never perfectly clear, but we can infer that Rose wanted to awaken the beast, capture it, and then use its power to provide Galar with an unlimited source of energy. I don't know if it was a prophecy or statistics that told Rose the region would run out of power in 1,000 years, but he became obsessed with stopping this at all costs, to the point that he would even endanger the living people of Galar. But it's never explained why Rose wanted to cancel the Champions Cup. I guess it would have freed up Leon to catch Eternatus, but that hardly seems like a worthwhile reason when you could have just waited a day. Anyway, we then have to battle Rose and his team of steel types. I love the Gigantamax Caparaja, but besides that, he goes down just like all the rest. What follows is another terrible reaction that aids in bogging down the success of this narrative. After beating Rose, he just claps his hands and says how much fun Pokemon battles are, and that he's so sorry for causing the darkest day. It's so weak. He just rolls over and abandons his plan pretty much. Eventually, he even gives himself up. But for now, we have to make our way to the top of Hammerlocke Tower to face Eternatus. Leon fails to capture it and we're left to take his place. Finally, the game gets its big payoff, the moment the developers envisioned, recreating the Darkest Day with you and Hop fighting alongside of Zacian and Zamazenta. All it took was 15 hours worth of plot contrivances and illogical thoughts and behaviors to get here. We get to fight Eternatus in a max raid style battle, and once it's defeated, we catch it in a basic Pokeball, which really makes me question that level 14 Goldeen who wouldn't get captured by a Great Ball back on the wild area. I mean, I gotta wonder what that thing's power levels were, seriously. Following this, Zacian and Zamazenta jump into the heavens, and the Darkest Day is pretty much wrapped up from there. The narrative of Sword and Shield is a total shit show, and easily the weakest the series has ever produced, even worse than X and Y's. The game spends way too much time trying to inform you about the Darkest Day, but it does so in very brief cutscenes that are portioned out throughout the entire game, making them very forgettable. Then it tries to recreate this moment in the final act, but it feels so rushed and out of nowhere that any sense of urgency or meaning is completely lost. Chairman Rose's plan is so easy to pick holes in that it isn't even funny. Why does he care so much about people losing power in 1,000 years? How does he know Galar will lose power in 1,000 years? Why does he think bringing about the Darkest Day will fix this? Why did he plan on using Eternatus to harness power that could last for the rest of time? Why did he cancel the Champions Cup? Why is Olina and the rest of the corporation so brain dead that they go along with this terrible idea? What even motivates Rose to do all of this? None of these questions are answered in satisfying ways, and I'm so glad this story doesn't drag on for far too long. All that's left to do now is take on Leon and his full team of 6. He features an Aegislash, Seismitoad, Haxorus, Dragapult, the final evolution of the starter that was strong against yours, in this case it's Cinderace, and a Gigantamax Charizard. This was a thrilling battle against a very powerful trainer. His Charizard in particular proved itself to be a tough opponent with its scorching fire moves and powerful rock attacks. If I hadn't allowed myself to use items, I probably would have lost to him, so well done, a solid fight from a mechanical perspective. Leon though ends up being a pretty forgettable champion. He doesn't have much presence or depth, even if the game tries to convince us he does. In fact, part of me thinks he's champion only because he uses 6 Pokemon, while everyone else uses 5 or less. He's got a good team, but he's full of cliche one-liners, has a single personality trait, that being brave, a cringy narcissistic pose, and he barely gets a chance to shine. Moments in which he saves everyone are never shown, but instead told. It leaves Leon as being a pretty flat champion, and that kinda sucks. But with that, we take over as the new champion of Galar, and the credits roll. Of course though, this isn't the end of the video, we still have a whole post-game to tackle. With the main story concluded, there's about 6 different things we can do in the post-game, and combined, they're all pretty underwhelming. For those of us who were hoping for a robust endgame, such as the highly speculated return to Kalos, I share in your disappointment. The 6 things we can do in the postgame are pretty much as follows. Complete the brief hour-and-a-half epilogue, get a free Charmander, try out max raid battles, take on the Battle Tower, complete the Pokedex, and rematch trainers in the Champions Cup. After getting the Master Ball from Magnolia, I decided to knock off the simplest one right away by collecting the free Charmander at Hop's house. It's a gift from Leon, and if you evolve it into Charizard, you'll discover it's one that can Gigantamax instead of just Dynamaxing, which I guess is a pretty nice victory present for defeating the unbeatable champion. With that, I I decided to kick off the post-game quest by following up on the hint the game shows us after the credits end, a shot of the ruins in the Slumbering Weald. Making our way there, we find Hop, who felt drawn to the location and asks us for one more battle. It seems like the AI has been given a small buff in the post-game, as Hop makes a few more plays. His Inteleon uses U-turn to dodge Ringo's super effective moves, and he seems to go for some super effective moves of his own. Still, it ends up not being enough to defeat us, and Hop beats himself up for thinking he could defeat us. We'll see that this post-game quest is meant to, in part, wrap up his character arc. Sonia shows up and tells us she's the new professor and that her newest book details the history of the Galar Region. Soon after, 2 examples of a barber's revenge show up. These 2 dapper lads are Swordward and Shielbert. Disgusting! They claim to be the true kings of Galar and claim that Sonia's book is full of lies and that they are the true lineage of Galar. Swordward has the nerve to challenge us, and after defeating his fighting-type team, we reclaim the ancient sword relic from him. Simultaneously, Hop loses to the red suit, and the ancient shield relic is taken. Not wanting to upset Zacian or Zamazenta, the 3 of us vow to stop the Blonde Brothers and reunite the ancient relics. I have no idea why we didn't just stop them right here and now. There's no reason for us to not challenge Shielbert, and if the Pokemon mythos is anything to go by, he cannot refuse a Pokemon battle if we make eye contact with him. Either that or just trip him when he runs away. It's incredible how villains can escape when the game's story demands it. I guess that would have made for a pretty short epilogue though. Returning to Sonia's lab, we meet her assistant and learn that the professor can track the brothers using her power spot detector, which really doesn't make much sense, unless it's implied that the shield relic gives off Dynamax energy, but it certainly doesn't seem to be that. It just works. Shut up and keep playing, the game says. She sends us off to Turffield to investigate a mysterious spike in Dynamax energy, and we get there quickly using the flying Corviknight taxis, which I really wish were shown instead of just implied. Not cutscenes or animations, we just get a fade to black. Arriving in the grassy village town, we learn that a Pokemon has Dynamaxed and is out of control, and is rampaging all over the stadium. Milo recruits Hop, Piers, and us to fight the Pokemon in the Max Raid battle style that this game added to the series. Max Raid battles are meant to be challenging battles with super strong Pokemon who never lose their Dynamax forms. You and 3 other trainers battle the beast to try and defeat it, but again, just more on these later, we'll get to it. For now, we have to fight a giant Serena who actually puts up a pretty decent fight, but eventually loses. The brothers once again appear, and Sonia kind of has this weird obsession with calling them weirdos. She just can't stop. She's just like, weirdos, 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 weirdos! Every time they appear, they're weirdos! And it makes me think that even Game Freak was embarrassed by their names, to the point that they didn't want them repeated too much. Anyway, they tell us that their plan is to force Dynamax evolutions in an attempt to summon Zacian and Zamazenta in order to use their power to reclaim their right as kings of Galar. This is about where the intrigue of the story of this post-game quest ends, as from here on out, we will travel to the other 6 big stadiums to do this same task over and over again with very little variation. The narrative isn't all that compelling, and unless you really enjoy the Max Raid battles, the gameplay doesn't really elevate it much. Perhaps the best trait is that it doesn't drag on across 4 or 5 hours, it'll be over soon. First though, we travel to Hulbury and Motostoke to aid Nessa and Kabu in defeating Dynamax Pokemon there as well. Rinse and repeat the same style battle until it's all over. Sonia calls us in from here and tells us that Swordward and Shielbert are at her lab, and she needs our assistance immediately to protect the Wishing Stars leftover from the Chairman Rose incident. Returning there leads to a double battle of you and Hop versus the evil duo, and after defeating them, they unveil it was a distraction so that the assistant could steal the Wishing Stars. I guess this was supposed to be a plot twist, but this random NPC is brought in out of nowhere earlier on, and that's already suspicious. To no one's surprise, she ends up being a traitor. The three of them flee the lab, and before even a minute has passed, Sonia picks up on more Dynamax Pokemon running rampant in the last 4 gym stadiums, which doesn't make sense. Again, it doesn't make sense. If Swordward and Shieldbird are the ones causing this to happen, how did they get there so fast if they were literally just here? This second round of Dynamax battles is different from the first, as this time around, you're expected to take on the mutant Mons by yourself without the help of any others. This is explained away by saying that you, Hop, Piers, and whatever gym leader is with you are each fighting their own Dynamax Pokemon. It's another example of something really cool sounding happening, but you never get to see it. When you're fighting the Dynamax Pokemon by yourself, they take a lot of damage, and super effective max attacks wipe them out in about 2 hits, so it's not really much of a challenge. This was supposed to be harder, but they didn't balance it very well, so it's actually easier than the first 3. At Bede's gym, we learned that he has completely taken over Opal's position, and he informs us that he's already dealt with the Dynamax Pokemon there, and instead challenges us to a battle. I rather like this touch. It shows how comfortable Bede has gotten here, and demonstrates that he really is capable of handling himself as a powerful trainer. Hell, he defeated 3 Dynamax Mons on his own. He's still no match for us though. He and the other gym leaders also give us rare versions of their league cards, which basically give an updated graphic and a little more information about each of them, which I guess is a decent little gift. I also like how Hop is questioning himself throughout this post-game journey, as his loss to Shieldbird has really rattled his confidence. He defers a lot to you, but not in the same over-the-top way he did in the main campaign. It's a bit more subtle and demonstrates some actual nuance in the writing. For players who pick up on it, the end of this mini-adventure is more satisfying because of that. After defeating the final Dynamax Pokemon at Hammerlocke Stadium, Sonia calls and tells us she needs our help at Hammerlocke Stadium. Hello? Right here. Why not just have her walk up to us? Anyway, we make our way into the power plant to confront the twins for the final time. After battling Swordward, we make it to the roof where Zamazenta is being bombarded with Dynamax energy, and it's causing it to go rogue. It takes a single warning swipe at Shieldbird, which is enough to totally convince him that he's screwed up, and it's up to you to calm down the beast by defeating it in battle. After beating it, it starts to go after Hop, but Zacian comes and saves the day. Sensing our power level, it seeks a fight against us, and this is our chance to catch the game's mascot. It can end up being pretty anticlimactic though, because really this is the only thing left to use the Master Ball on, so you'd be dumb not to. It has a pretty low catch rate, so you have no reason to not use your one guaranteed catch. We then have to bear witness to another set of characters who give up on their whole plot and plan and immediately feel sorry for what they did. I hate how Game Freak makes these characters so spineless. After watching you beat Zamazenta and catch Zacian, Shieldbird and Swordward completely denounce what they've done, they promise to atone for their actions, and basically won't stop praising you. It's terrible, and I hate it. This whole mess of a story has been contrived and pales in comparison to previous post-game adventures. Having an hour-and-a-half long post-game quest is embarrassing enough, but if this is the quality of what we are gonna get, I'm glad it's short. At least the story wraps up pretty nicely, as Hop calls us back to the heart of the Slumbering Weald for one final battle. He's managed to calm down Zamazenta, and it recognizes Hop's pureness and agrees to become his Pokemon. It's a touching sentiment, but this cutscene is terrible. They finally decide to show us when something cool happens, our rival catching a legendary, but it's pretty low effort. Hop takes a few steps back and winds up the throw, except he's not holding a Pokeball, there's nothing there. We just see the animation play out and get a fade to black, and then the game tells us Hop has caught Zamazenta in a basic, regular Pokeball. Are you kidding me? Talk about some insane catch RNG. Am I right? With that, Hop initiates a battle with us, and the fight provides him with an epiphany of sorts. This whole adventure he's been chasing after Leon's title, and now our title, and it hasn't made him happy. He tells us how seeing us succeed and Sonia achieve her goals made him feel left behind at times and wants to blaze his own path forward, which I can appreciate. He ultimately decides he wants to become a Pokemon professor, but admits that it will take a lot of time and effort. He truly seems like he's up for the challenge though, and it feels like his story has come full circle. He wants his life to be about him, not chasing the accomplishments of others. It's a good message for kids and adults. With that, the story bits of Pokemon Sword come to an end. The post-game quest is really lacking. Not even this touching ending can save it from being short, repetitive, contrived, and full of uninteresting characters who are nothing more than goofy narcissists. Can we please go to Kalos next time? Please? Is that so much to ask? There's a few more things to tackle before we wrap this video up, and the first is a look at the Battle Tower. So after finishing the ending mission, you unlock the ability to fight at the Battle Tower, which is already a poor decision. I'm not sure why you gate the Battle Tower off behind the hour-and-a-half post-game quest that ends up being very forgettable. I could maybe justify it if the post-game story was any good, but it isn't. So why lock this off for players who just want to jump into the Battle Tower and begin the long grind towards constructing competitive Pokemon? The Battle Tower functions pretty much identically to how it has in previous generations. You fight in single or double battle format with no items against teams that are built with a competitive edge. Your goal here is to fight through different matches and rank up your Battle Tower tier, which unlocks more rewards. One idea that I'm really glad they incorporated is the idea of rental teams into online play. This man will rent you up to 5 teams, each built to last in competitive play, which is very useful for people who don't want to spend dozens upon dozens of hours to breed the perfect Pokemon to have a chance in the late stages of the Battle Tower. You can also apparently download your friends' teams to try out as well, which is another great idea. Now I wish they had let you mix and match your Pokemon from different downloaded teams though. Still, the idea is one worth praising, and seems kind of necessary in a world where Pokemon Showdown is available and saves you an exponentially large amount of time to team build when compared to the actual games. I mean, I personally would rather play through Pokemon Showdown, but I can respect that Game Freak is advancing further on their attempts to make competitive Pokemon easier to get into, an effort that started in Generation 6. It seems that a lot of methods used to create competitive Pokemon have been streamlined, and the game isn't shy about handing you tons of ways to level up Pokemon quickly. You can get lots of rare candies and battle points to buy items that are useful for competitive play, like choice scarves, throat sprays, and focus sashes. The emphasis really seems to be on giving the player the power to make their own competitive teams as quickly as possible, and while it's not something I'm personally into, I'm sure much of the fandom has to appreciate these changes. I'm not really one who can speak about the state of the meta right now, but in terms of players' abilities to build their own teams, it seems like things are in a good spot. To end this section, I'll say that I love that you encounter Leon here pretty early in the Battle Tower fights. It's good to see him one more time, and if you're trying to get all the rare league cards, this one isn't made tedious by locking him behind a gargantuan amount of battles. For dedicated Pokemon trainers who don't love competitive battling, their next goal may be one that stood the test of time: completing the Pokedex. It's a task I won't be undertaking for this video, but I decided to catch some Pokemon in the wild area for background footage to play. The first thing I noticed was how much the catch rates have been increased after you become champion. Everything in the wild area is boosted to level 60 and is captured relatively easily. If you get it to half health, you can pretty much catch it with a regular Pokeball. It's the complete opposite of how the game has functioned so far, but it's a welcome change. Anyway, what I really want to talk about now is my thoughts on Dexit. Game Freak casually announced that many Pokemon wouldn't be returning in Sword and Shield during a Nintendo Treehouse event at E3 last year. I remember watching this live and thinking something must have gotten lost in translation, and it would just be sorted out later. Soon after that though, it was confirmed that some Pokemon wouldn't appear in Galar, as the national dex had been cut. Like many others, I was stunned, and it seemed like a surefire way to shoot yourself in the foot if you're Game Freak. You've already seen the tens of hundreds of YouTube videos reacting to this and citing reasons for why it makes Game Freak a lazy company. A few years ago, they had claimed to have future-proofed the Pokemon models so that they could be continued onwards. They also said that this game would get a lot more attention to detail with better idle and attack animations, as well as the animations with Pokemon moves, which never really materialized. As I said earlier, some of them are better, but it doesn't seem like enough work was put in to justify it. On top of that, these games debuted on the most powerful system Pokemon has ever seen, which makes the absence of all those Pokemon even more mind-boggling. When the games eventually released and we discovered that only about 400 of the nearly 1,000 Pokemon would be in the game, many fans were outraged and disappointed, especially to see some of their favorite Pokemon left off the roster. I know I certainly felt that way when Starly, my favorite Pokemon of all time, was left on the cutting room floor. There are so many negative aspects of Pokemon Sword and Shield that have been highlighted and criticized simply as a reaction to the games not including every mon. And a lot of these complaints are legitimate gripes, and the voices of people calling for Pokemon to evolve past this stagnation have only gotten louder. I used to really be into the Pokemon post-game grind. I completed the National Dex in ORAS, and I loved competitive battling in X and Y. Dexit though makes me want to not engage with this kind of content anymore, because I feel like it just isn't as worthwhile. I have resisted buying access to Nintendo Switch Online for years now, and this game doesn't do anything to make me want to purchase it to engage with online battles or to use the surprise trade feature. Dexit sucks. There's no other way to say it. It seems that even Game Freak has acknowledged how much blowback the Dexit fiasco has caused, as it was recently announced that access to over 200 Pokemon, new and old, would be coming to the game in the form of DLC later this year. If you buy the $30 expansion pass, you get access to new content and areas that feature these Pokemon, and if you choose not to buy it, you can still collect these Pokemon through trades. It has the feel of a very slimy business transaction, gating away Pokemon behind a paywall. Even if that paywall isn't a firm one, it just doesn't feel good as a fan of Pokemon to see this kind of behavior. They really botched this one, and it's going to take something big to get all of the fans back on board, although the games did sell tremendously well, so you have to wonder how much Game Freak even cares. Continuing on in the Wild area, it's finally time to have a look at Max Raid Battles, the final of the big three additions to the series alongside the Wild area itself and Dynamaxing. Max Raid Battles are a very worthwhile addition to the series, and more so this game in particular, even if I don't personally find them to be ultra enjoyable. In the Wild area, there are beams of lights radiating out of dens, and this indicates a player can encounter a Max Raid battle there. You always enter the fight alongside of 3 other trainers who can be either AI or friends if you're playing online. You'll then face off against a Dynamax version of a random Pokemon. You're pretty much told what Pokemon you'll be facing when you enter the fight though, so it helps in choosing which one of your Pokemon to bring to the fight. From there, you and your companions take on the creature with the ability to Dynamax altering between players. I didn't battle online though, so I was the only one who took advantage of Dynamaxing and used it to combat these foes. Some matchups are a cakewalk and you can get through them pretty brainlessly, while others will really challenge you, especially if you're playing alongside the non-optimal AI companions. For example, I thought a bug-type move would be more than enough to get past Malamar, but what I didn't account for is its contrary ability. This Pokemon continued to put up shields that required a lot of attacks to break, and once you did break it, the Pokemon normally got a huge debuff to its defense and special defense. But since Malamar's ability reverses all of these stat changes, it actually got buffed, making it much stronger. To go along with that, you're kind of on a timer to catch Dynamax Pokemon in these battle types. Take too long and the storm surrounding the beast will become too strong and blow you right out of its den. Having each encounter be with a random Pokemon is pretty smart because it requires you and your team to really plan out a strategy and know your competition before diving in. And if you do manage to defeat them, you're guaranteed a capture of the Pokemon, which is particularly nice when you stumble across brilliant versions of Pokemon which are highlighted by a pinkish aura instead of a red one. In the short time I've spent doing Dynamax battles, I've been pleasantly surprised with their implementation, but they haven't really done enough to hold my interest. However, if you're trying to complete the Pokedex or raise competitive teams, this system will be a godsend to you. That's because your reward for completing these raids are astronomically helpful in grinding out Pokemon levels. You get a lot of sweet rewards like berries and TRs, but the most useful thing you get are XP candies, which can be used to boost a Pokemon's level quickly if you have enough of them. That means after your Pokemon has been fully EV trained, you can now hit them with a ton of EXP candies to get them leveled up properly for competitive play, which is super useful. The one downside of these battles though is that Gigantamax versions of Pokemon are locked behind them, and trying to get a certain mon can be very frustrating due to the random roll of the dice. If you want a Gigantamax Duraludon or any others, good luck because you'll need the RNG in your favor to actually encounter one. I guess it does kind of create for a nice status symbol if you roll into competitive play against your friend and you're packing a Gigantamax Pokemon, but it does seem to be an arbitrarily difficult way to get Dynamax Pokemon, and it's for the wrong reason. Still though, I love the implementation of max raid battles. They can provide some fun and challenge on their own, and it's tied into so many other of the game's post-game objectives and opportunities that it comes off as a quite well thought out system. I mean, the berries you earn can be used to further your curry index, and a lucky TR may be just the move you wanted for a competitive Pokemon. This game has a strong effort in mitigating how long it takes to grind out max level Pokemon, and that is greatly appreciated. On top of that, I imagine many players are simply getting a lot of enjoyment out of max raid battles, and so I'm glad we have them on offer. The last thing for us to do is rematch the Champion Cup and take on some familiar faces yet again. Every time you challenge the Champions Cup, you can choose to invite one specific trainer who you will be guaranteed a matchup against. It's kind of cool being able to invite leaders you didn't face in the first Champions Cup in order to see how their teams have changed and evolved. There's also a few random NPCs thrown in to battle you who each have mono-type teams that don't utilize Dynamax, which does make them a lot easier. Winning these tournaments also allots you a few items from the Ball Guy, one of the best NPCs Pokemon has ever given us. The first of which is always a wishing piece that can be used to respawn max raid battles in the wild area. After that, you get a random reward, some as common as an Ultra Ball, with others being valuable like a Toxic Orb or a Life Orb. Outside of that though, there really isn't much reason to rematch the Champions Cup, because there's so many other ways to level up Pokemon faster. Still, at least it's a way to take on your favorite gym leaders once more. Before I get into the concluding statements of this video, I have to point out something that really disappoints me: the length of Pokemon Sword and Shield. Now, granted, I'm not someone who will spend hours and hours collecting every Pokemon or racing competitive teams, so my playtime was never going to balloon into a massive number. Still, completing the main story, the post-game quest, and then checking out the Champions Cup rematches, and dabbling in some max raid battles and the battle tower only took 20 hours to do so, which seems pitiful compared to previous entries. For me personally, that is one of the most disappointing aspects of the game, that it's over too quickly. All the months and months of waiting for these games to release, only for them to be by far the shortest mainline Pokemon games to date. It's just another disappointment to throw on top of the rest of the pile. It's crazy that Pokemon Sword and Shield are my least favorite mainline Pokemon games to date, despite the fact that I think a lot of the new introductions made in the generation are pretty worthwhile. Dynamaxing proved itself to be an interesting blend of Mega Evolutions and Z-moves, and was implemented in a way that didn't break the metagame completely. The wild area, while ugly and frustrating at times, gives players quick access to a lot of different Pokemon to build their teams around, and many ways to challenge themselves in tough battles, while potentially laying the groundwork for an entire open world game. It's also home to max raid battles, which can sometimes be boring and sometimes be gripping depending on what you face. Regardless though, your rewards are sure to aid you in some form or another. I felt like all of these additions, while still not perfect, were additions worth having. Despite that though, most of the fun from this title is the same fun that comes from every new generation of Pokemon. The excitement of going on a new journey and discovering new creatures. Even after more than 20 years, that feeling is one worth chasing, and it's a big reason why I still recommend trying Pokemon Sword and Shield. With that being said though, it's important to limit your expectations. The reality of Dexit and the lack of improvements in its wake haunts the experience throughout its short duration. There's no other way to say it. The new additions and changes don't feel like enough to justify sending almost 600 Pokemon to their doom. It fuels the fire of angry Pokemon fans and makes things like a garbage main story, a short runtime, lazy cutscenes and transitions, ugly textures, a boring post-game mission, a wild pacing issue, and everything else stand out much more than it normally would. Every little negative component that fans have put up with for years is suddenly not acceptable any longer in the eyes of most, and that seems pretty justified to me. Moving forward, Pokemon needs to overhaul its formula in some ways while not losing the core identity and appeal of the series. It's easier said than done, that's for sure, but they've dug themselves into a hole now with a large portion of the dedicated fanbase. To make matters worse, Game Freak has a horrible track record for removing features and mechanics in future installments of the game. So who knows if all the things I've praised in this video will even continue into Generation 9. It truly seems like the success of Pokemon Go has made Game Freak's main series games less important, with the phone app busy printing millions and millions of dollars for the Pokemon Company every single day. Still, it's hard to say the mainline Pokemon games are in serious danger when they continue to sell so well. Despite all the endless debate though, at the end of the day, Pokemon Sword and Shield are still Pokemon games, and I personally can appreciate them for that, and that reason alone. If you made it to this part of the video, let me take a moment to thank you for watching, because I know this took a couple hours of your time to watch. I hope you found it entertaining, and I encourage you to leave your thoughts on Sword and Shield in the comments below. This video took a long time to make, so I want to spend some time hyping my channel and what you can find on here if you want more. I basically make 4 kinds of videos. The first is reviews of some of the biggest games releasing, and as you can see, some of them are flashing across the screen now. The second is analytical videos where I try to highlight one mechanic, theme, or interesting component of a game, and you can see some of them on screen right now. The third would be videos like the one you just finished, massive commentaries and critiques of certain games. At the time of this video, I only have one other on the channel, and that would be a 2.5-hour critique of Sly Cooper and the Thievius Raccoonus. And finally, the fourth type of video is the Psychology of Gaming series, where I take a look at how psychological principles are worked into games and how games can affect us psychologically. I enjoy making all of these videos and hope to bring out more as 2020 progresses. So check out the channel if you want more, I'd greatly appreciate it. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Please leave a like if you enjoyed the video, consider subscribing for more, follow me on Twitter at NopeNapNarp, and as always, have a nice day, and take care.